Day. We also attend vendor events to help bring awareness, to speak to families who might just not be able to make to these meetings. We're going to be at Baby Bumps and Beyond on this Sunday. We've also been working together with the event organizers to be able to provide a sensory room. We're also providing workshops, and we provide opportunities for families to make memories and not always have to apologize and say, I'm sorry. We've cried together, and we've shared in many amazing milestones, such as nonverbal childs saying their very first word. As my son did, finally, he said, Mom. He is now 3 years old. We are a family, and we stick together. I will end with, I am a proud resident of Sault Ste. Marie, a proud volunteer, and I love volunteering my time to bring up autism awareness and most of all acceptance to Sault Ste. Marie in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a proclamation here to read for you, Ms. Collins. Whereas World Autism Awareness Day will be recognized on April 2nd, 2019 in Canada, thanks to Senator Jim Munson's Bill S-206, an act respecting World Autism Awareness Day. And whereas autism spectrum disorder, ASD, affects more than 100,000 Ontarians, ASD is now recognized as the most common neurological disorder, affecting 1 in every 66 children, as well as their friends, family, and community. Whereas ASD is a spectrum disorder, which means it not only manifests itself differently in every individual in whom it appears, but its characteristics will change over the life of each individual as well. A child with ASD will become an adult with ASD. And whereas Autism Ontario, formerly Autism Society Ontario, is the leading source of information and referral on autism and one of the largest collective voices representing the autism community. Since 1973, Autism Ontario has been providing support, information, and opportunities for thousands of families across the province. Whereas Autism Ontario is dedicated to increasing public awareness about autism and the day-to-day issues faced by individuals with autism, their families, and the professionals with whom they interact. The association and its chapters share common goals of providing information and education, supporting research, and advocating for programs and services for the autism community. Now, therefore, I, Christian Provenzan, was Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim April 2nd, 2019 as World Autism Awareness Day in the City of Sault Ste. Marie.
Thank you.
I think we will be doing a flag raising tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock, yes,
And
sir.
everybody's welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, we have an associated resolution on this topic under 8.5 that we'll deal with at this time. Municipal Autism Strategy. Councillors Vezo-Allen and Gardy are the mover and seconder. And the motion reads as follows. Whereas in March of 2018, Autism Ontario released the latest statistics regarding autism spectrum disorder and reported that the rate of the disorder is 1 in 66 live births. Autism is a pervasive spectrum disorder marked by difficulty in social interactions, which does not discriminate between race, culture, socioeconomic status, or religion. The rate of autism is higher among males, 5 times more likely than females. Children with autism become adults with autism, and there is no cure. And whereas in the northern community, we recognize that the number of children and adults who have been diagnosed on the spectrum or who are awaiting a diagnosis has greatly increased. The initial pathway to services is through the Ministry of Child and Youth Services, whose offices are in regional areas that provide mainly administrative services but not actual early intervention. And whereas early diagnosis can lead to early programming and success for individuals and families affected by autism disorders, and whereas neither the provincial nor federal governments have specific autism strategies, leaving many families and individuals without access to the services they require, and whereas the City of Sault Ste. Marie values all citizens and wants everyone to have equal opportunities for success, now therefore be it resolved that Ontarians with Disabilities Advisory Committee be requested to strike a subcommittee dedicated to working with community partners to develop a municipal autism strategy to assist families, caregivers, and individuals dealing with an autism diagnosis, and to create a roadmap for the autism community in shaping the future development of our community.
Okay, so We're going to go to Councillor Vezoallen. You can speak to this, and I think there's somebody in the audience who wants to speak to the matter too, Councillor?
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so however you want to proceed.
So this resolution is not a knee-jerk reaction based on what's happening provincially with autism services. This conversation started about 10 years ago with then my Ward 2 councillor, Mr. Terry Sheehan. There was discussion with him and I on how can the municipality work with organizations in helping to support families and adults with autism. Part of the conversation began because my son, Aiden, at the time, wandered off from our Forest Avenue home twice, which for any parent is terrifying. For myself, it was a nightmare. And I proposed that we had autistic child signs in the neighborhood, as I had seen in other municipalities. So fast forward 9 years later, and this resolution will give the Accessibility Committee a formal request and structure to work with our community partners so that we can create an inventory of services for both children, for adults. It will help newcomers coming into our community so that they know what is out there in terms of access. And it can also help us as a municipality in our future planning, such as the chat of having a sensory room and things like that. So we are not providing services. I want that to be very clear. What we want to do is to make it easier for people living here now and for people living here in the future to understand what is available to them in terms of supports for autism. And I would like to welcome Matthew Doherty. He's a young man who has requested to speak to this resolution. So Matthew, please come up to the mic.
Welcome to Council, Matthew.
Thank you. That's upside down. Hello, my name is Matthew. Great start. I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, formerly known as Asperger's syndrome. Actually, 10 years ago, I spoke to the council at one of the first proclamations of Autism Awareness to create awareness of the challenges faced by those with autism. Back then, the prevalence of autism was, I believe, 1 in 110 live births, whereas today that number is 1 in 66. When I was in elementary school, I was the only student in the entire school with autism. Today, there can be anywhere from 2 to 6 in a single classroom. Over the past 10 years, there were many challenges I had to work through, as I was not expected to graduate from high school. But over those years, I had numerous appointments, therapy sessions with my family doctor, pediatrician, psychologists, speech and occupational therapists, as well as telepsych conferences with sick kids and psychological and psychoed assessments. In addition, within the school system, there were also a lot of things I had to do. I was involved in IEP and IPRC meetings and assessments, working and meeting with resource and technology teachers and the communicative disorders assistant. And I still had schoolwork to complete. It wasn't easy. But I did, in my first year of high school, made the honors program. And I went on to graduate high school and enter college. Graduated from there, I then worked with ER Consulting, who facilitated my current employment, and I'm currently working right upstairs at the Sault Ste. Marie Innovation Center as a junior developer. Sadly, only 14% of adults with autism work full-time. I could very easily have been a part of the 86% who were unable to find secure employment. It was difficult to access the supports I needed. Autism is a lifelong disorder requiring lifelong supports for numerous needs. So I'm here in support of a local autism strategy so that those following me have more opportunities and that our city understands the very specific needs that come with our community members on the spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. It's inspiring. Councillor Gardy, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Not to follow that, sir.
No. Okay. Do we have any questions of the mover or city staff? Councillor Hollingsworth?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to say to my fellow councillors, thank you for bringing this to our agenda. And I also want to recognize city staff over the last number of years for being very responsive to basically this special group. As you know, we have a sensory playground that's relatively new. And we also have special pool hours as a few examples. So I look forward to seeing more advancement with this strategy that can hopefully build on these current initiatives that have been implemented over the last short while. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none? Is this going to be recorded? Is this digital? Mr.
Not
Clerk?
tonight.
Oh, okay, not tonight. All in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you.
Under Agenda Item 5.2, National Volunteer Week, Elspeth Belair, a member of Volunteer Sault Ste. Marie Planning Committee, is in attendance.
Welcome to council, Ms. Belair.
Thank you. Mayor Provenzano, city councilors, citizens of Sault Ste. Marie, and members of the press. My name is Elspeth Belair, member of the Volunteer Sault Ste. Marie Planning Committee. Along with Rick Ward and Laurie Houston, we've been preparing for our 31st Community Volunteer Celebration to be held on Friday, April the 12th, during National Volunteer Week, April the 7th to the 13th. National Volunteer Week is our opportunity to celebrate and honor the hard work and dedication of our community volunteers. This year's theme is the volunteer factor, lifting communities. We see it every day. Volunteers leading neighborhood activities, lifting the collective confidence to solve common issues. Volunteers tutoring people to read, lifting their self-esteem and increasing their success in school. Volunteers visiting people, lifting their spirits and keeping them connected. Volunteering also gives volunteers a lift. When we volunteer, our spirits are lifted when we have the opportunity to work with others. Our confidence lifts as we gain skills and experience. It illustrates that when people volunteer together, the sky is the limit. This is the volunteer factor. During National Volunteer Week, it is important to remember that everyone has the right and responsibility to be an engaged citizen. Volunteering isn't just for select people, it's for everyone. It is with a heavy heart that we are announcing this year will be our final community volunteer celebration. We are, however, comforted knowing that our community organizations will continue to take every opportunity in the future to honor and celebrate the volunteers each day and also every year during the Volunteer National Week. Please join us Friday, April the 12th at the Marconi Cultural Club to celebrate 2019 National Volunteer Week as we honor volunteers and the power of volunteerism in our community. Tickets for the Community Volunteer Celebration are available at the Volunteer Sault Ste. Marie office at 301-258 Queen Street East. Telephone is 705-256-7476, extension 210, and they're available Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., and they're $25 each. Mayor Provenzano, would you be so kind to read our proclamation?
I will. Before I do, though, I want to thank you for all of your work in volunteerism. I bump into a number of people frequently, Elsbeth, but none more frequently than you.
Thank you.
So you've done a lot in the community on your own time and with your own heart and your own care, and I want to thank you for that, especially recognizing all the other people in the community who are doing good work. So whereas 12.7 million Canadian volunteers give their time to help others, contributing close to 2 billion volunteer hours per year. Whereas volunteers in Sault Ste. Marie mentor our children, feed our hungry, comfort our lonely, beautify our green spaces, and fundraise for our charitable organizations. And whereas Sault Ste. Marie's volunteers include families, workers, retirees, men and women of all ages and backgrounds. And whereas the collective result of the work done by our city's volunteers is that Sault Ste. Marie is a more desirable place to live. And whereas volunteer roles in our community comprise of delivery drivers, friendly visitors, youth mentors, event volunteers, and so much more. And organizations in Sault Ste. Marie that rely on volunteers include such fundamental organizations as ARCH, Meals on Wheels, Surrey Hospital, Canadian Red Cross, Victorian Order of Nurses, to name just a few. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim the week of April 7th to April 13, 2019 as National Volunteer Week, and urge my fellow citizens to recognize the crucial role played by volunteers in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, that's it for the proclamations delegations portion of the agenda. Given that we can't start dealing with planning items until 5:30, we can now go into the consent portion of the agenda.
Councillor Christian beat you guys to it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 6.4, the Memorial Gardens agreement. Through you, I guess, to Mr. Lamming, if I could. I read this over, and I understand, you know, what the attempt is here, but I'm just wondering, as a normal course, do most of the events that are scheduled at GFL Memorial Gardens, are they normally part of a regional tour? Like, if we're getting an event, isn't it likely that whoever's performing their thing is also performing in, say, Thunder Bay or Sudbury? Is that, or is it that simple?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, you're partially correct that there is a trend if they're going across Canada of a Canadian tour, but that's not always the case. And with this partnership, potentially right here with Venue Coalition, they have expertise within the report of the Sudburys, the Kitcheners, that they have that group buying, that bulk appeal that they have right now. And they have knowledge of all different types of acts that are touring across Canada, whereas when you're working with an individual promoter, we work with approximately 12, you're only getting that specific act. So they have a better visibility amongst what's touring the whole nation.
If we approve this, who's responsible for soliciting and booking acts right now? Whose responsibility does that fall under? And how, if we sign this deal, how does it change their responsibilities?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, the manager of the Memorial Gardens, are also known as the manager of community centers, Rob Santa Maria. That is part of his day job right now. That will not change. He'll still be sourcing on a day-to-day basis. Last year we had 5 acts, pretty strong acts. And as we've stated in the report, since 2006, there's been 200 plus acts and events that are there. So that won't change. With this partnership right here, we're looking ways to expand upon what he's drawing already. So with this, we feel there's a few more partners out there. And with respect to Sudbury, directly they brought in acts like Toby Keith and those types of acts that are a little bit more high profile. And we're hoping to maybe get some more of those acts with this partnership. And this would be accommodated within our existing marketing budget.
Okay, one final question. I understand it's a 1-year contract?
Yes.
Okay, so my final question is, it's a 1-year contract, and I'm always willing to try something that might expand our prospects. Do we have do we know how we're going to measure the success of this contract?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, yeah, we'll be seeing the success by what type of acts we're actually drawing to the Sioux. So if they're not drawing any acts, then that's a pretty easy decision. But if they're able to land a few acts that we would have not been able to entertain elsewise, we're going to measure that as our success.
Then obviously we're looking for incremental revenue from the 20,000 spend.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, that's any act we bring to the Sioux, we try to do at a break even or better because we know the spin-off effect to our restaurants and our hotels. So that's what we base it on.
Thank you.
On the same matter, Councillor Hilsinger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Lamb, is there a specific analysis that you have done?
That leads you to a goal or a target that you know will work towards canceling or removing the annual deficit that the GFL Memorial Gardens currently experiences? Are you looking for something specific here?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, I can two points to this. Last year, we actually had a very, very strong performance. So when the results come out, we're going to see a very strong swing from year over year, and year to date, we're doing very well. So I can speak to that. Also, with respect to this, we implemented in our area with Tom Vare our KPIs, our key performance indicators. So we want to draw at least 2 to 3 high-profile shows, which would be in excess of 3,000, then another 5 shows that would be over 2,000. So we have those metrics in place. Last year, we did 8. Our target was 7. So we exceeded our event. This year, we're in the process of just finalizing what that number would be this year. So we'd be looking to achieve those targets. So that's how we measure our success.
Thank you.
Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lamming. Mr. Lamming, within the contract, is there a set minimum of the number of acts? So we're investing just over $13,000 US for the partnership agreement. Is there something in place that there's, a bare minimum of, 5 acts will be guaranteed or 10 acts or that sort of thing, so that they can't come back to us and say, well, we couldn't get anybody that was interested in coming to Sault Ste. Marie?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen. Yes, that's a good point that you raise. They did raise 1 act for us last year in the Skate Canada program tour. They do have 2 potential acts that are already on site for later this year. So we have those already in the hopper that we're hoping to finalize very shortly. So this is why we did it for a 1-year pilot. So we didn't set that they had to bring 2, 3 acts for sure, because that's hard to pin them down on that, to be frank. But we'll see by the end of the pilot that we're very hopeful that they'll be able to land an incremental number compared to last year.
So we have no recourse if we enter into this agreement and they book 0 acts within the contract?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen, we have no recourse to go back and obtain the subscription fee right here, but as I stated, they did bring an act to the Sioux last year before this agreement even happened, and that we already in the talks with a number of acts for this year. So we're confident that they're going to bring a few forward.
Thank you, Mr. Lamming.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Lamming. The entertainment industry is always constantly evolving, so this seems to be a positive step. However, just to feed on my colleague's question, you were saying that it's about $13,500 US for membership. We're trying it for 1 year. For our membership, what else do we get? I mean, if there's something that's booked, is there additional fees that we should be aware of? It sounds like the $13,500 for membership helps to bring to our attention different acts and so forth, but is there any additional fees that we should be aware of?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. Yes, the 13.5 is actually a discounted rate. Their regular rate is $15,000 US. Since that it's an initial pilot for us, they had discounted it to 13.5. We do have other fees. We have our facility fee that we do charge. Within that, there's the event development fund that was just started, where up to $1 per ticket can be charged for that. We have approximately, in conversations with my colleague to my right, we have approximately $8,000 in that fund at that time. That fund there allows us to go out and source shows moving forward. So we do have that. Within the facility component, we can charge a ticket surcharge, which most venues have to help address, and that could be split with them moving forward.
Okay, so I understand that if there's any additional fees, it will be put onto the tickets price.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that's correct. All shows that come forward, there's a break-even analysis that's done by Rob Santa Maria, and that's sent through to myself and Mr. Vare and Michelle to my right. So we make sure that the shows are not brought on at a deficit.
Okay. One last question. Charity. I think the council is a very great supporter of charities. Is there anything they've proposed to you in the past where there's a charity component where a dollar goes back to a particular charity or anything like that? Was that ever discussed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, no, that's not part of the agreement that's been proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Laming. I do have a quick question. Hopefully you know the answer. Do we know how many acts that we have missed out on historically in the last few years by not having this membership?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, that's a very tough question. That's would have, could have, because those would have been acts that we may or may not have been aware of, and Venue Coalition has the relationships with all the different types of acts that are touring, so there might be acts that might not traditionally come here that might come here, so that's a hypothetical scenario, so that's a very tough one to answer.
If we made the assumption, like based on how many acts, let's say, and this is a big assumption, went to Sudbury through this company that didn't come here, more or less, is that a number that we have available, or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, just as an example for Sudbury, what Venue Coalition brought to them last year, Toby Keith, Brad Paisley, Teresa Caputo, Jeff Dunham, just to name a few. So those are some extra acts that they brought forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else on 6.4? Seeing none. Councillor Christian, do you have any other matters?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two others. 6.2, through you to Mr. Ver, I believe. I'm reading the report that you provided. Do you have any idea, Mr. Ver, once the material is here for the docking systems, any idea how long it takes to install? And I guess my other question is, from the point at which if we decided to approve this, that we single source this, do we have any idea how long it takes to get the material in and get the docks installed? Just trying to put a timeline on it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, we would expect, we've estimated about 2 weeks to get the docks installed. And in terms of the delivery of the docks, we were hoping to get them near the end of May, mid-June.
Okay, so that would, if we get them at the end of May, mid-June, so really what you're hoping for is that by the start of July, the height of the boating season, that we'd be ready to go. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, that's correct.
Is there any reason to think that because we may single source this, that we might get pushed back at all? Any unnecessary delays? Are we comfortable that this particular supplier has no other conflicts that may delay the installation? Because we've kind of lived that before. Just your thoughts on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, we have had a number of conversations with the supplier of the docks, and certainly have made it known, our intention, if council should approve the single sourcing, that this is the goal to get in before the busy season, and we've received commitment from them that they'll be able to accommodate that.
And I want to understand this. Is there, for something like this, is there any wording in contract or procurement process where there's a penalty clause that states that a certain date has to be reached? Because they're really, we're putting all our eggs in one basket here. We're really at the mercy of this one supplier. Is there any provision for penalty charges of any kind? Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Bear.
I'm going to, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I'm going to refer this over to Director Brent Lam.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, through the process of the RFP, they will be bonded moving forward to make sure that the service will be delivered. With respect to delivery dates, there's no specific clause that if they're a month away that they're going to be held penalty. We have dealt with them before, just to let you know, on the Bellevue Marina, and we had good success there. They're also the providers of the fuel dock and also the repair section we did last year, so that portion of the dock can be reconfigured, their emergency to the existing fit, so that's an added benefit.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Hollinger, the same matter?
Yes. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Ver. Safety is obviously number one concern for our city. So just to touch on safety, when the docks were put in, some of the docks were put in at Bellevue, there were some safety concerns, such as anchoring wasn't done properly. As a result, some of the finger docks were wobbly. And it's my understanding that this is the same company that is going to be putting these docks at the Bond Arb. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that's correct.
Okay. So there's also some safety concerns when the other docks were put in at Bellevue, not just with the anchoring, but the width, and people jumping off their boats could be unsafe because the width is quite narrow, correct? So my point is, when these docks are placed, are you reaching out to the Boaters Association, which is a very active group? Will they be consulted when these docks are placed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, yes is, I guess, think the short answer. And based on the experience with the additional anchoring required at Bellevue, we've, got the design to have enhanced anchoring when we put the docks in at the Bondi Marina. And also the flotation and the style of the dock is slightly different in the new marina versus some of the ones that were purchased.
Okay. Just a couple more questions on the Bondi, this particular marina. The locking mechanism, will there be a padlock for the boaters to get onto the piers? And will it be a door that opens in or out? Again, it's a safety issue, especially for those that are in a wheelchair or maybe on a walker or a senior citizen.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, I'll have to report back on that. I know we dealt with the issues at the Bellevue Marina, and I'm sure we factored that into the new design at the Bondi Marina.
Okay. And two other questions. I know there's going to be AMP, the 15 amp and so forth. Are there going to be a 30 and a 50 amp boxes at this marina?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, yes, that's in the current design of the new dock system.
30 and 50 on both boxes, on one box. So we have.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that level of detail is a little beyond what I know, but I do know there's a 30 and 50 amp service being planned for the dock.
Okay. And one final question, correct me if I'm wrong, so obviously the fuel dock has been done some time ago. These docks are going to be hopefully done, as Councillor Christian said, this summer by our date. And are we, or have we started to look at a boater's lounge, including laundry, free Wi-Fi, and so forth, and grills, barbecues?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, there's no set plans on that. Certainly, we've taken feedback from the boaters, and each year staff works that into the capital prioritization schedule. So that's something we're looking at for future budgets.
Okay, I hope so, because looking at other marinas, this is the typical accessories offerings that most other marinas offer boaters. Thank you.
Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Ver. Regarding the installation process, are we losing a lot of revenue if we're doing this work in June? If it does go into July, are we going to be losing a lot of money? When's the boating season? From July on, or do we get boaters coming in June?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Bruni, we do have boaters that do come in June. So we will lose some revenue, but the team's been working to minimize that, and that's the time frame that we are working on, in the hopes with the single sourcing of these docks to minimize any revenue that's lost there.
So completion date will be?
We're looking at the completion date mid to end of June, prior to July.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so next I have Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Bear. Mr. Bear, I spoke with some boaters after the marina upgrades at Bellevue, and there were a few concerns. Docks are too narrow, which is not great as far as my colleague pointed out, for safety. As well, some docks were installed in the wrong location and had to be changed. So as far as project management of this install, is that going to be, whose responsibility is that to communicate with the construction company, the dock company?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen, the Recreation and Culture team, Virginia McLeod and Rick Bordian will be the point people, and certainly Director Brent Lamming will be involved as well, dealing with the firm and the installation of those docks.
My other question is concerning the low-profile docks. Are there going to be, from what I could see, there are going to be some low-profile docks for kayaks and canoes and that sort of thing with the upgraded Bondi Marina?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezuela, that's correct. We're excited about that feature. We think it'll be a great addition to the Roberta Bondi Marina and allows people easier access to put in kayaks, canoes, et cetera, into the water.
Will there be a fee for people to put their boat, their canoe, and their kayak in, or is that going to be something that we're offering the community for access to the water?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezuela, at this point, we don't have any fee associated with that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Gardy.
I had a couple of questions about the low profile, been asked and answered.
Thank you. Anybody else on 6.2? Seeing none. Councillor Christian, is that it for you?
Just one final one, and it's kind of a question and a comment, and I'll direct it to the CAO.
Okay, on which matter?
Oh, sorry, 6.17.
Okay, 6.17.
The McMeekin Steering Committee. Is there any thought, Mr. CAO, because of the nature of this committee and the importance and the expenditure involved here, does it make sense to have an engineer on that committee? It just seems to me we got all the experts around the table, but we don't have an engineer.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that was an oversight for when we brought this thing forward previously. We will be having a lot of augmentation with all sorts of staff. This is the steering committee, and engineering will be part of that. But we're hoping that the first meeting we would have a discussion about exactly that, where we could bring engineering into the.
Thank you. That's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else in 6.17? Councillor Gardy.
Councillor Christian's question just jogged my memory. Just because I'm not totally familiar with these steering committees, do we ever have members of the public sit on these or not?
Can.
They can?
No, you can't. I mean, the council can appoint whomever they want.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you want to add to that, Mr. Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, while you can, I would note, and I think Mr. Vera would confirm, that there will be extensive engagement with all sorts of stakeholders by this committee, so that you don't necessarily need a member of the public or a stakeholder group on the steering committee itself, but they will engage with those groups.
Thank you.
Okay. So that is it for Councillor Christian. Councillor Hollingsworth, I had you next on my list here.
Thank you. Item number 6.6, on-demand transit service pilot.
Sure.
Just a couple of questions. I guess I will put this towards, just 1 second here. So I'm just putting it towards.
Well, this will go to Mr. We're going to go to Mr. Lamming on this in any event, so.
Mr. Lamming. First question is, the equipment that we'll be using, will it be a small bus, or what equipment are you proposing for this pilot?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Hollingsworth, we'll be using our own infrastructure, so it will be our 40-foot buses to start. As stated in the report, we'll be looking for if the pilot will be running on Sunday night evening service, we'll be looking at reducing the buses that'll be on the road and use the existing infrastructure in a more efficient manner. So instead of 9 buses, we're looking at potentially 6, 5, or 4, but being utilized in a much better way with the technology that the successful proponent will provide.
Okay. It's my understanding when I was reading your report that with this pilot, there could be some initial cost savings. I also read that Cochrane, Alberta, is trying this as well, and they're trying a pilot for 1 year, and they're proposing to give 2 months free. Are we looking at any PR? Are we looking at any incentives for this pilot?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. To afford the actual pilot, what Belleville did, they did their one route. It cost them $125,000 to run their pilot. In order to run our pilot, we're looking to take certain buses off the road on Sunday evenings and use that savings to fund the pilot. So there's not really an opportunity to offer any free service, but expect maybe to the best way to put it is to show to the public that we can use the technology to better deliver the service. From our survey for the 4 Sundays we did, about 44 passengers per route, about 445 total on Sunday evenings, which is a very low ridership compared to our daytime service. So we found it concentrated in hearts of the community. So we think that we can deliver the service better in those fashions, have some dedicated buses in those areas, and then have a couple other available to do the periphery.
Okay. I'm looking forward to seeing this pilot go ahead. I think we're going to get some positive feedback. And the other benefits that you outlined is such as ambulatory care service, servicing difficult areas is also very attractive. Thank you.
Anybody else on 6.6? Councillor Brezow-Allen, then Councillor Hilsinger.
For you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lamming. Mr. Lamming, the city of Belleville has only a population of 46,000, and it does cover a smaller geographical area. When you were consulting with the city of Belleville, did they give you any strategies or any sort of list of, what worked, what didn't work in terms of their pilot?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brezow-Allen. Yes, a couple of pointers there. We spoke to their general manager of transit. We also spoke to their transit manager. The thing that they found out was they almost had too much success. They started with 2 buses, and they went up, I think the stat was, just for me to reference it right here, ridership increased from 1,500 to 4,300 just on that route. So they would go from 46 individuals per night to potentially 250. So the big thing that they said was, be prepared. You may start with 3 or 4 buses, but you may need to up it to 5 or 6, potentially.
Do you know which route it was that they had the success with? I know Belleville well, so that's why I'm curious if it had something to do with Loyalist College or if it was downtown related.
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brezow-Allen. Yeah, this was really specifically to the area that serviced their industrial park. They were finding there was a huge demand there for get to people back and forth to work, so that's where they wanted to target. So that's the route that was utilized.
Thank you, Mr. Lamming.
Councillor Hilsinger.
Mr. Lamming or perhaps Ms. Field, where are we at with talking about on-demand transit and other opportunities the community has to expand transit service, especially in the evenings and later in the evenings? Where are we at with the look into Uber or other types of ride sharing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger. We're close to having the draft for, I believe it's the next council meeting for the Uber changes.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Councillor Dufour.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Director Lamming. I noticed under point 5 that in addition, as part of the RFP process, options can be provided to address alternatives for ambulatory care service. My question is just kind of coming from the knowledge that the DSAB, I believe, is no longer providing that service as of a certain point in time and is looking to change that. Have you spoken to Sioux Area Hospital about the possibility of providing partnership there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, not specifically providing that service. What I can say, though, is with respect to our ambulatory care and parabus services, that the demand continues to grow, and to service that area is a big challenge right now for our area. So with respect to doing these types of pilots, it might open up the opportunity to maybe shift some allocation of funds to deliver that service, but this pilot would first have to prove that that makes sense, and that's why these 3 other items were listed here as potential phase 2 approaches here with respect to delivering it down the road. So we go through the Sunday evening pilot, and then maybe take a look at this as a next stage in the approach.
Thank you. And as a small follow-up question, will be the app that will be developed in order to provide on-demand service, will that provide us with an opportunity or a software background to be able to provide a better transit app for the remainder of our services?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, yeah, as we did in the past, we did an expression of interest. So we received 9 proponents, so now they make up the vendors of record. So we're going to be doing the request for proposal, going to those 9 firms. We've vetted those firms, and they're qualified to sit as the vendors of record, and a lot of them have the different types of app technology which you're speaking to be able to deliver. So that we're going to be looking forward to those proponents making a submission through the process, and we'll be able to ask those tough questions during the evaluation process.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Scott on 6.6.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lamming. It mentions one of the points is a solution for people that might not necessarily have access to internet or technology. Do you see that being an issue at all? Like, I'm not sure what your research has shown, but just curious about that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, it's a good question. I've been asked that one a number of times. And what a couple of the other communities did, especially Belleville, is they still maintain their dispatch. So that person, so if you don't have a smartphone or a laptop or your home computer to call or to make the connection, that you still had that human touch point where you could call and get a dispatcher. From the results from their pilot, it's shocking. They very rarely receive any phone calls now it's in place. They may get four a month. So that concern may not be as big as we think it is, but be prepared for it. And as for internet, if they don't have data on their phone, I think that was the second part of your question there. A lot of the places here that are points of origination do have internet. So for picking up people from the college or university or from the malls, they do have internet. So that'd be something we'd have to explore further if it actually is a big concern moving forward. And that's why we propose this as a pilot to try to identify those types of issues.
And just another follow-up question. So given that this is a pilot, I'm not sure if we have this figured out yet, but for the timelines, will we be running a steady regular route bus at the beginning and the implementation of the pilot, just for people to kind of get used to the idea of using an app as well, having like one bus that's on demand and one bus would be the regular route? I think Belleville did that, so I'm just wondering.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, that could be an option, but we'd want to see what the feedback is from the proponent, because if we're going to go in and do a pilot, we're going to do it and jump in full route. So I think that the best way to do is get some of the feedback back. We want to go all in and make sure we try to drive success, and that's why we chose Sunday evening, because the ridership was so low. So I think we're going to be able to have the good coverage. The bigger question is how many buses to serve the region. So we'll get that identified for the pilot.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we'll leave this item now. I just want to thank staff and recognize the good work. I think it's positive that we're looking at more, efficient and effective ways to deliver our transit than just running kind of the buses in the same route. So it's a positive development. We'll see how the year goes. I think we're going to get off consent because we have planning at 5:30, but one of our motions on our agenda a little farther along, we do have somebody here that's present from Algoma on the safeguard motion that Councillor Shoemaker's brought. So we're going to deal with that motion so we could kindly let that person leave here and not have to wait through the remainder of our meeting. So we'll just call that motion up, we'll deal with that motion, then we'll go to the planning agenda.
Under agenda item 8.3, safeguard measures for the Canadian steel industry, a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Nero. Whereas the steel supply industry employs more than 3,000 employees and represents billions of dollars of economic activity in our community, and whereas across Canada the steel industry employs more than 25,000 middle-class workers and supports an additional 100,000 high-quality jobs from coast to coast, and whereas these jobs and future economic growth are being threatened by a surge of offshore imports resulting from excess global capacity, and the diversion of imports resulting from changes in trade policy around the globe, including Section 232 measures in the United States. And whereas the federal government recognized the potential injury caused by these imports to the steel industry and implemented provisional safeguard measures in October of 2018 with the intent of stabilizing the Canadian steel market. And whereas these provisional safeguard measures are in place for a 200-day period and are set to expire on May 13th, 2019. And whereas these provisional safeguard measures have had the effect of preventing a continued surge of offshore imports from damaging the domestic steel industry, and whereas the Canadian steel industry, including both Algoma Steel and Tenaris Algoma Tubes, recently participated in hearings at the Canadian International Trade Tribunal and presented the need for continued safeguard measures beyond May 13th, 2019. And whereas continued safeguard measures are vital, affording the domestic steel industry the necessary market stability to continue to grow and create high-quality, middle-class jobs in our community, now therefore be it resolved that Sault Ste. Marie City Council support the request of the Canadian steel industry to the Federal Minister of Finance to impose final safeguard measures for all 7 steel products subject to the provisional safeguard measures. And further be it resolved that Sault Ste. Marie City Council support the request that the final safeguard measures be reflective of the remedies requested by the Canadian steel industry during the safeguard hearings held by the CITT in January 2019.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Laura Devoni's here from Algoma Steel, sorry, and thank you to her for reaching out to see if this is something that we could put on the council agenda. It's brought forward collectively for the benefit of Algoma Steel and Tenaris Algoma Tubes, who are 2 major employers in our community who are critical to our local economy. Pretty lengthy resolution, so I won't go through the whole thing, obviously, but sort of to summarize it, I would say that when steel tariffs were imposed upon Canada by the U.S. administration, that hopefully is not there for much longer. They part of the reasoning that they were imposed because there was alleged steel dumping into Canada by offshore countries of low-quality steel, which, of course, made our steel less attractive to purchase. So we imposed stricter, we as Canada, in response to having tariffs imposed on us, imposed restrictions to make sure, or safeguards, I think they call them, to make sure that this low-quality steel was not coming in, and that anything that came in met the proper standards and you know, was permissible to enter the country. I think the assumption was that that would resolve the steel tariffs that were imposed on us. It did not. They still so our safeguard measures were only imposed for a short period of time, thinking that the U.S. would lift their tariffs. They did not. Our safeguards are set to expire, and so we are seeking to the Canadian steel industry, and I think our council would be wise to support, is seeking to extend the safeguard measures that are in place so that our industry isn't hit from both ways by steel dumping in Canada and by tariffs from the U.S. So I think a very reasonable request on the part of the Canadian Steel Association, and critical to our 2 local employers. So that should be, I would think, enough for our council to support it wholeheartedly.
Okay.
I don't know if Ms. Devoni wishes to add to that.
We'll get to her in 1 second. Councillor Neer, do you want to say anything as a second?
No, I'm good, Mr. Mayor. I'm just happy to second it.
Ms. Devoni, did you want to say anything to council? You have to come to the mic if you want to speak so the people of the city can see you. Okay. Council, do we have any questions or comments on this? I think we're all very strongly and widely supportive of it. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you for your time, Ms. Devoni. So we are just 2 minutes, I think, before the consent agenda here. Do you want to go, sorry, planning, do you want to go back to consent for a minute, Councillor? Or sorry, Mr. Clerk?
If someone has a minute's
Do we have a
worth
short
of,
matter on consent? Anybody have a really short matter from consent? Are you sure, Councillor Hollingsworth? Okay, which one?
Okay, 6.13, status update on ATV bylaw and so forth. Through you, Mayor. To Mr. Lamming.
6.13, Mr. Lamming.
Obviously, this is
It would be legal. I think it would be Ms. Fields. It would be legal.
Sorry. Obviously, this is about ATVs and UT all-terrain vehicles. Out of curiosity, do we have a bylaw right now that deals with snowmobiles?
This is not for snowmobiles.
Right, it's not.
Yeah.
It's
This does not cover
snowmobiles.
if I'm
Was
correct.
not considered. Okay.
Yeah.
That's correct. We do have a bylaw that governs and regulates the
Okay.
use of snowmobiles in
That's
the
unrelated to
community.
this, though.
Okay, and this does not relate to scooters as well. I'm just clarifying.
My understanding of it does not relate to electric scooters.
Okay, thank you.
ATVs and UTVs.
That's all.
Okay, anybody else on that matter? You know what, we're gonna have to come back to it at 5:30. So, Mr. Clerk, if we can go to the consent agenda.
Under the planning agenda, the first item, 7.7.1, A219Z, 85 Johnson Avenue. Motion by Councilors Scott and Dufour, resolved that the report of the planner dated 2019-401 concerning the application be received and that council approve the application to rezone the subject property from institutional zone to low-density residential zone with a special exception to permit 4 semi-detached dwellings on the subject property, and that the legal department be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to effect this approval.
Mr. Tenazzo, I'm going to start with you. Can you please give the folks watching at home a summary of the application?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The subject property is located on the south side of Johnson Ave. It's a recently created property that used to form the northern part of the St. John's schoolyard. The applicant wishes to construct 4 semi-detached dwellings for a total of 8 units. The recommendation is to approve, and Mr. Fremlin is here should council have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Fremlin, do you or anybody on your behalf want to make any representations to council on the application? No, that's fine. Okay. Is there anybody here to speak in opposition to the application? Anybody to speak in opposition? Seeing none, council, do we have any questions of staff or Mr. Fremlin on the application? Sure, you can make a comment, Councilor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank staff and Mr. Fremlin for having an open house. Councilor Nero and myself attended. The turnout was respectable, and a lot of the questions were answered. So I thank you very much, and I know Councilor Christian has brought something forward last council, and having these meetings with the area residents is an excellent idea. Thanks.
Okay. Any more questions or comments, council? Seeing none, all in favor? Application's approved. We will move on to 7.7.2, Mr. Clerk.
7.7.2 is A719Z, 728 Wellington Street West. A motion by Councilors Gardy and Dufour, resolved that the report of the planner concerning rezoning application A1719Z be received, and that council approve the application to rezone the subject property from low-density residential zone with a special exception to permit a duplex and a reduced frontage to low-density residential zone with an amended special exception to permit a triplex and 3 parking spaces in the exterior side yard, and that the legal department be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to effect this approval.
We're going to start with you again, Mr. Tenazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The subject property is on the northeast corner of Wellington Street West and Bainbridge Street. It was formerly occupied by a single detached dwelling and a grape wholesaler. The grape wholesaler no longer exists on the property. In 2013, council rezoned this property to permit a duplex. However, a triplex was subsequently constructed. So this application is to legalize that existing triplex. The recommendation is to approve, and Ms. Nicastro is here should council have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Nicastro, did you want to speak to council on the application? Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that's here to speak against the application? Seeing none, council, do you have any questions or comments of staff or Ms. Nicastro? Councilor Gardy.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Mr. Tenazzo. So just to get this straight, in 2013 it was approved for a duplex, but a triplex was built. Correct.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay, so over the course of the time that there were renovations being made to the subject property, were there inspections regularly being made? Can I defer? Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not exactly sure how the inspection process and what the timing was in terms of when that third unit was added.
Can I give that to somebody else to answer?
Sure. I mean, I think what you're trying to get to the bottom is how is somebody permitted to build?
Yeah, how'd the
duplex,
triplex get
and
built when a
how did
duplex
they get
was?
to a triplex?
Yeah.
So
Can I get some background as to how that transpired?
So I'm going to have the CEO indicate who he thinks is best to answer that question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Gardy, I would suggest that the building officials, Freddie Pozobam's here, he might be able to respond to you in terms of what the process is for.
Thank you.
Well, I don't think we want to know the process generally. No, Freddie, please sit.
Yeah, I don't want to, I'm looking
I don't want
specific.
to go through a big kind of, how did it happen in this specific
Yeah,
case? We
that's
want to
all I'm
talk
looking
about the
for.
process of how something's built. How do you get to a situation where you're permitted to have a duplex and you have a triplex?
I don't know if the mic's on.
Your mic's on.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to, who asked the question?
I did.
Oh, Councillor Gardy. I believe at the time it was built as a semi, and through, when it was finished as a semi, it got converted into another unit, and it just came to our attention.
It came to your, can I follow up, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
It came to your attention by way of somebody kind of calling you guys and saying this is what's going on in the property, or because there was an inspection made to follow up on what was permitted in the original plans?
No, I believe it came to our attention through a complaint.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Dufour.
My question is very similar to Councillor Gardy's. What I'm wondering is if it was the same owner who was given the permission to build the duplex who built the triplex, or was there a change in ownership that would help to account for some of this discrepancy?
Mr. Castro, did you want to speak? I see your hand going up there. So, as the proponent or the applicant, you're certainly welcome to answer any questions. As the applicant, you're certainly welcome to answer any of these questions. So if we can have the main mic, thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Castro.
Okay. So there isn't any change of ownership. I'm the owner because I constructed it with subcontracting and so on. There was inspections for a triplex, although there was a big misunderstanding with it being all subcontracted that I actually thought it was, but then I got it appraised last fall and they said the city doesn't have it as an actual triplex. So, so here I am today, but all the fire retrofit and everything is done that way, but, so I'm here to officially convert it.
So I understand, because that wasn't entirely clear to me. You thought you had the permission to build the triplex the whole time through?
Yep.
Okay, so you were building a triplex thinking you had the permission to build the triplex?
Yeah, right.
But you didn't, you had the permission to build the duplex?
Right, and I found out when I went to get this in appraisal, and they said the city doesn't have it as a triplex.
Okay. Councilor Dufour, do you have any further questions?
No, I think it's clear from the report that, and I'd just like to confirm this with Mr. Tenazzo, that if the applicant had come in 2013 and asked to rezone from single detached to low density residential as a triplex, would that have presented any difficulties at that time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a difficult question to answer. I think if it was presented in the manner that it's existed for the last 4 or 5 years, I don't think there would be a problem. The property's large enough to support the use, and at the end of the day, we're looking at this from a land use perspective, not necessarily how we got to this point, but whether this development works or not. In our opinion, it does.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? The application is approved. Thank you, Mr. Castro. Before we move on, Council, subsequent to the meeting beginning and me looking at the agenda and the objections, I realized that one of the applicants in his personal capacity is a client of my firm, but also I have multiple objectors who are also clients of my firm. So I have the interesting position of being conflicted on both sides of this issue. So I'm going to have to concede, remove myself from the chair, and Councillor Vezo-Allen is going to have to chair this.
I have to adjust the seat. There we go. Thank you.
Madam Acting Mayor, members of council, motion under this item is by Councillors Gardy and Vezo-Allen, which I have to now change to Councillor Dufour to second this, as Councillor Vezo-Allen is now the acting mayor. Resolved that the report of the senior planner concerning rezoning application A1819Z be received, and that City Council approve the application to rezone the subject property from Parks and Recreation Zone, PR, to High Density Residential Zone, R5S, subject to the following special exception. 1, that the proposed apartment building not exceed 12 stories. And 2, and Council, just for a note, Mr. Tanasso did note that the language in this condition was a little unclear, so I've adjusted it. That the maximum required lot coverage for the apartment building be increased to 35% from 33%. And further, that the subject property be deemed subject to site plan control pursuant to Section 41 of the Planning Act, and that the legal department be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to effect this approval.
So we'll start with you, Mr. Tanasso, for a summary, please.
Thank you. This is the former athletic field of Collegiate Heights School. More recently, it's been utilized as a city snow dump. It's the northwest. The property's on the northwest corner of McDonald Ave and Gladstone, and the application is to permit a 12-story, 90-unit apartment building. Mr. Ruscio is here to speak on behalf of the application as well as his consultants, and I believe there are also a number of neighbors that also wish to speak on this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tanasso. Do we have representatives for the, if you could like to come up for the project?
So I just want to start by saying how excited we are about this new project that will give seniors a viable option for retirement living. That is going to be the focus of our project. Given our city's demographics, there's a real need to provide suitable housing for seniors. The density is an important aspect because we're catering to senior living. We need numbers in order to justify the amenity spaces that give seniors the opportunity to socialize with their friends and neighbors. Seniors need choices in order to be able to stay in Sault Ste. Marie and enjoy our city. Many of them want and need a safe environment to live in and have a home without maintenance. They don't necessarily need to be in a retirement home, but many of them do not want to be in their aging homes, and they do not have very many good options. The building's height is also something that will give the development its appeal, affording magnificent views of the forested area of the ravine and city beyond. Also, given the soil characteristics and the need to pile, the feasibility of the project is such that you have to build up instead of out. We had TELUC prepare a sightline study which demonstrates that most of the building's views is below the tree line. We plan on utilizing materials the best way we can that complement the area, including glass, wood, and brick, although we're using them in a more contemporary way and for a more progressive feel. We met with all the city departments, dealt with any questions at the Development Assistance Review Team, their DART meeting, including the Conservation Authority, the PUC, Planning, Legal, Engineering, the Building Division, and Public Works. I believe everyone at the meeting felt it went relatively smoothly, and the project seems to be consistent with sound planning principles. I have John McDonald here from TELUC, who's a civil engineer, and he'll speak to any technical questions or concerns that come up. And I also have David Ellis, the architect. And so we'll speak to some items that seem to have come up in the past few days regarding issues such as slope stability and environmental concerns. We can certainly address those items. Parking and traffic, construction impacts, and there were also some questions on energy efficiency. So anything specific to those items that have come up, we're happy to address them specifically as well, so we're prepared for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruscio. Is there anyone in attendance opposed to the? Okay. So, and who wishes to speak? Do you want a show of hands? Who wishes to speak? Okay, so let's start with the top row on this side, and then we'll work our way down. Yeah. If you could please first state your full name and address. Thank you.
not as tall as Mr.
I have the same
Ruscio.
problem, it's okay.
Pardon?
I have the same problem.
Makes people listen because they have to look down. Would you be the designate mayor or the assistant mayor? Or
I am the acting mayor.
okay, hi. Anyway, Madam Acting Mayor, councillors, staff, and members of the media, my name is Mary Loretta Harrison, and I live at 36 Hearst Street, and I have done so for about 40 years. I live in a home that was built by the original owner and then entrusted to us 40 years ago. So if you do the math, you can figure out the house is pretty old. Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present just a few of my objections and the objections of some of my neighbors, well, most of my neighbors, to application A819Z for the rezoning of 22 McDonald Avenue. Just 2 points of clarification before we continue, if I may. I'm assuming there are minutes of this meeting?
Yes, there are.
And would they be available to me?
All minutes are available on the city website.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks.
and if you require an unelectronic copy, you can contact Mr. White, our city clerk.
Okay, thanks. I ask because I'm not wearing a wire or a secret recording device, and I'll need the information and the answers you provide to us tonight when I follow various appeal processes. Secondly, although I welcome my neighbors, this isn't a true reflection of the interest in the community. We're a small neighborhood of family homes. Some of our members can't leave their homes, can't drive at night, or in one case, some are moving out and some are moving in because it is the first of the month. And many likely don't know of this meeting. My concerns, as I said, are many, but due to the limited time and the number of people here to protest this development, I've had to pursue the limited time that I've had to pursue the Planning Committee's report. I will begin with the first item in it. In my letter to Mr. Kirkall, I refer to it as ambiance. Presently, neighbors have bought and chosen to live in a quiet, small family community. The proposed development would significantly change the tone and scenic appearance of the area. Page 2 of the report R2 states that low and high density development should be integrated and compatible in density, height, and building setbacks. Now, I know that Mr. Ruscio and his group have a picture, so I did make some pictures of our neighborhood so you could see the difference between what is proposed and what we have in our community, but I'm not sure whether I can give you those pictures or not.
Madam Acting Mayor, members of council, we can receive the pictures as
Okay.
part of the official record.
I think once you see the pictures, you will understand our objection. Oh, someone's coming to hand them out. Thank you. There's no way that anyone could possibly suggest that the 12-story Gladstone, it has a nickname in the community, I won't tell you what it is, could blend into our community. when you look at the pictures, I suggest that you use the trees for reference points. As my neighbor Carrie said, the trees in front of that giant complex look like really small shrubs. In the background section of the report, it states that there have been no official previous applications for the property. Neighbors were under the impression that Chartwell was considering a similar project to the one that is under consideration, and were discouraged by stability or whatever. Since I only had the report over the weekend, I was not able to follow up with the parent company to see what records they might have and why they were denied that. The vacancy rate is one of the rationale for the construction of this place. I had very little time to really thoroughly go through the planning document, but I could not find any demographic data. Mr. Ruscio made comments about a need, but where is the data and who provides it? My understanding from media reports is that there is not an economic need for luxurious seniors housing, but for affordable housing. Due diligence would seem to require that councillors be provided with those profiles of required housing. The provincial government's requirement is for affordable housing, not housing which might free up appropriate housing. Indeed, one insurance company that my neighbor was telling me about indicated that it is insuring more than 200 empty homes. It would seem that vacant does not translate into affordable. If the council can be provided with the demographic data and the need for affordable or luxury housing, I respectfully request that I receive a copy of that data. If the purpose of this project is to provide housing suitable for rich seniors and enhance the city's ambiance, many of my neighbors encourage Mr. Ruscio and his group of developers to consider the existing sites, the general hospital site, that could be enhanced. The Dorn Brewery, that could be enhanced. Or the Windsor Park sites. I have many more points for consideration, but understand that my time is limited, and you might appreciate listening to a less quivery voice. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the next step.
Thank you, Mrs. Harrison.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address my concerns. I'm Lyndon Pond, and I live directly across from the site in a 100-year-old home. And like many in my neighborhood, they're 75 to 100-year-old houses with rubble stone foundations. And I have stucco walls. And we have plaster, not drywall, in our older homes. So one of my main concerns is the construction damaging our very old and treasured housing stock that we have in the area by vibration from deep set pilings that are needed to construct something this big. So that is a personal concern of mine. I looked at the planning report that Peter prepared, and I enjoyed talking with him about the project, and I found a number of items of concern. Page 2, R2 states that high-density housing should be limited to major arterial streets and areas abutting downtown. We are not downtown. Yes, we can easily access downtown via Pym or Bruce, but we are not on a major artery, and nor are we downtown. It's a quiet neighborhood, as Mrs. Harrison was saying, of predominantly 2- and 3-story homes. We have on page 2, significant forest corridors shall be preserved and enhanced. We have a significant ravine vegetation, which for me, I look out my window and I have this beautiful stand of trees. And it reminds me of when my house was an original farm. And we have lots of apple trees as a result. So I can imagine how it was 100 years ago. If this goes through, I'll look out my window and there will be a monolith, 12-story, huge, modernist architecture instead of a field and a treed area. And currently people use it. We walk our dogs there. People jog and go around the area. They ride bicycles. So even though it's not designated parkland, even though it was originally Parks and Rec, it is used as such. And a loss of that will be that'll be very sad. Page 3, the ravine is an important drainage course for areas north and east of the property. The city, you spent $5 million to upgrade the drainage, and we all suffered through a fair bit of vibration when that happened. I think the kind of vibration a 12-story building will produce will actually imperil all that work that the city did. I'm not an engineer, but I know how much vibration we went through in summer before last. Addressing the building itself, the 12-story building on page 4, 12-story building will be a prominent fixture of the city's skyline, utilizing 4 distinct facade treatments. Now, Dave Ellis is a very accomplished architect, and he does cutting-edge, modernistic buildings. Nothing wrong with that design, but it does not belong in Collegiate Heights neighborhood. It's down in the waterfront, along Queen, along Bay Street. It would be spectacular. It just does not fit our neighborhood. A good example of architecture that does fit in with a natural wooded area is certainly I was an art teacher at Cass for many years, and the Central Algoma Secondary School, the architecture with the waterfront and the surrounding woodlands was integrated perfectly, and the building is wonderful. It had some structural things come up, but still aesthetically beautiful. The Bug Lab down around Bellevue Park, it blends in with the natural beauty that we have in Bellevue Park and along the river. This building does not do that. It is not in harmony with the surrounding area where it is potentially going to be placed. I just want to see if there's anything else here. I want to address Mr. Tulloch's sightline analysis because the building is 138 feet high, potentially, and our trees in that area, which are very mature, I've got one of the tallest, are about 35 feet, 38 feet in height. So there's a good difference between, there's no way that building is not going to dwarf our canopy of trees in the area. Let's see what else I have. One more thing, I think. I want to talk about the parking congestion. I live right on the corner across from Collegiate Heights, right on the very corner. And We have a lot of parking congestion from a very well-attended and popular church, Our Lady of Good Counsel. And its architectural style is traditional, by the way, with beautiful stained glass windows. When the church is in session, at least twice a week, they're a very busy congregation. The traffic goes all the way up to Bruce, down Gladstone, and all the way on McDonald, all the way to Pym. That's all overflow parking, and then also on the left side of Gladstone. So it is packed. And I think adding another 90 potential people parking and their vehicles coming in and out, it's really overflow. Collegiate Heights put in a parking lot down at the bottom of the hill, which is virtually unused. They did it to pass their design, and then they never built a way to get from that parking lot up the hill. So the staff and visitors park all in front of Fauquier all the time. Every weekday, you will not find a spot. Fauquier is filled by overflow parking from Collegiate Heights. I don't feel our area, this little corner can't take any more vehicle congestion. And that would include the people coming and going from this apartment proposed onto Bruce, onto Pym, and over to, and down McDonald Hill. One last issue about the, there's a line in the report that talks about pedestrian access is proposed to McDonald Avenue, page 5 in the planning report. It's actually perilous for people to cross McDonald. The traffic comes up the hill so fast that I've had to go out and rescue seniors about 4 or 5 times who are going to get hit by cars because they start off across the top of the hill with their walkers and the cars speed up the hill from the bottom of McDonald, and I've seen numerous close misses. So that is not a pedestrian-friendly point at all. So I have personally witnessed that. I think I think I've pretty much covered all of my concerns, and I really hope that City Council will look at those pictures. It gives you a sense of our neighborhood that Mrs. Harrison provided, and vote no to rezoning this plot of land. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pond. Is there anyone else on this side that wishes to speak? Okay, then we'll start on the other side at the top and work our way down.
My name's Nicole Gaida. I live at 28 Summit. So I just found out about this yesterday while I was out walking my dog. And I've been really thinking about this all last night, all today. And to echo the 2 women that have already spoken, our neighbors, I do not see how this building fits into our neighborhood. I think you need to maybe walk the neighborhood. I know Mr. Ellis lives there. For me, it would be a really hard sell how this building would fit into our neighborhood. It's 12 stories high. Somewhere in your speech, Mr. Ruscio, I think you said something about the trees would still be taller or something. I don't know how that's going to happen as well. This is going to be a dominant building in an old neighborhood, and I just don't think aesthetically it's going to look good. That can be argued, of course. My other concern is increased traffic. So not only does this increase traffic, and we've heard about the concerns of parking on the streets, we've also have heard about concerns about people crossing the street. I will testify. I have a dog. I walk every day. It is a bit dangerous, but I can get across a lot quicker. What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about increased pollution? Because there will be that. People need to drive. If we have a 12-story building with 90 units, people have to drive to get their amenities here in Sault Ste. Marie. Drive to go grocery shopping, drive to get wherever, to the library, whatever. there'll be increased accidents, and then just on a maintenance standpoint, there's going to be more traffic, more potholes. That's a sore spot I know in this city right now. I just, again, don't see how these issues can be resolved by putting in a 12-story building. You can't argue that seniors possibly need homes, or sorry, no, possibly need homes. Of course they need housing. Again, are we talking about affordable housing? No, we're talking about luxury condos. So who is it really benefiting when it doesn't benefit the neighborhood and then doesn't benefit people that need housing? I'm not sure. Like, I'm totally against it for these reasons. I didn't really understand what it meant to go from 33% to 35%. The rezoning of parks and recreation. Again, I just think it's a bad idea for the city in general to be allowing this kind of development. We need parks, we need green spaces. I know we look out and we see a lot of trees and stuff, but that's going to attract more people to this city. And frankly, that's more taxpayers. I think we could use this land a lot better than putting a 12-story building on it. Again, construction damage, it is conservation area. What's going to be done about that? And it's going to change a very quiet neighborhood. So again, I guess my questions really are, how does this really fit into the neighborhood? How we're going to be the ones paying the price for the increase in traffic. So that's an increase in maintenance, an increase in pollution, increase in accidents. Again, I'm asking all councillors, I know I sent a letter earlier in the day asking you just to look at both sides, weigh the facts before you vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaida. So we'll go, is there anyone across the top that wishes to speak in opposition? Then we can go to the next row.
Madam Acting Mayor, esteemed councillors, staff, members of the media, thank you so much for the opportunity. I know that we've all sat here and listened to you a lot, so I'm going to try to be quick for you. My name is Tova Arbus. I live at 94 Lansdowne Avenue. My property is directly behind where the building is proposed to be, and looking out through my backyard and my back windows, both upper and lower levels, that is what I would see through the tree line. And at this time of year, I'm sure you can understand that there's not very much protection as there are no leaves on the trees. A number of the concerns I have, I addressed in a letter that I sent out to you already. I won't go over all of those, but I just would like to underline the concerns that myself, many of my neighbors share. You've already heard a lot of those today. I think what it really boils down to is that very important point in R2, the integration and compatibility within the neighborhood. This neighborhood is known and valued for being peaceful, family-centric, quiet, a heritage neighborhood with a really deep history. And I think that's what makes it the appeal when you're talking about this kind of a project. This is why people would want to live in that luxury building in this place. The views and the neighborhood are entirely appealing. And I acknowledge that a project of this nature is extremely exciting for our city. What I question is whether it's a good fit in this neighborhood, or perhaps would it be better suited to somewhere that is typically a high-density development area. I believe very strongly that the designation in place of that southern limit of the railroad tracks, keeping these type of builds within the downtown core is for a reason, and it's to preserve these historic, family-centric neighborhoods and to preserve that peaceful quiet that appeals to people. It's the reason we bought the house there. And what a lovely thing to be able to say that I can access the amenities and the downtown so I can participate in my community very easily while still having a bit of an oasis to go home to. I very much share the concerns, the environmental concerns, the congestion, but I really think that taking time to think about the ambiance and aesthetic of the neighborhood and whether something of a medium or lower density would be more appropriate within that setting. I think that a deferral of decision-making would be what I would ask for, so that residents within the neighborhood, both those who were already notified, but the many who were not notified, being outside the catchment area, and who didn't even, some of them, know that this project proposal was in place, would give more time to communicate with the developers to find a better balance and something that everybody could be on board with, and that suits both the needs of the developers, of housing requirements here in the Sioux, and of development to push our city forward for future sustainability, but also something that will make current residents and potential future residents happy as well. If you haven't already, please take a look at the letters that are circulating. They highlight all of these concerns. And I thank you very much for considering our side of things as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Arbus. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak?
Acting Mayor, honorable councilors, staff, media, 90% of what I wanted to say has pretty much already been said, so I'll add on a couple of other things that haven't been said yet.
I just need you to give your name and your address, please.
Yes, my name's Eric Peterson, and my address is 94 Lansdowne Avenue. I'm on the property on the other side of the ravine from the proposed development. One thing on green spaces, so the closest green space next to the currently undeveloped space that we're talking about today is Bruce Park, and it's fairly small in comparison. The next closest green space is Hamilton Park, which is also smaller than Bruce Park, and that's about half a kilometer away. And that's followed by Moffley Park and Penhorwood Park, which are both approximately 1.2 kilometers away. For families with children, public green spaces within walkable distances are a vital part of outdoor play. Secondly, as R2 states, low and high density development, we've all heard it already. The two things that come out to me are the areas abutting the downtown core. I think it's clearly not the case that this is abutting the downtown core. There, as others have said, there is clearly access to downtown. However, we're all the way on top of the hill in an established residential area. Secondly, as it comes to major arterial streets, I don't believe that McDonald Avenue is one such street. So for most similar developments of this size find themselves on roads which meet one of the following conditions. Either it's one lane of traffic in both directions with a dedicated turning lane, or you have a multi-lane road that has one or two lanes in each direction. McDonald has one lane going one way and another lane going the other way. So I think the comments on traffic congestion are very well made. But the last thing really has to do, and this is a similar point that everyone seems to be making, is that it really has to do with, does this building really fit the aesthetic of the area? I mean, you look around in that neighborhood and the tallest buildings you have around are the three-story retirement home. And really there's nothing much larger than that. Here we're proposing a 12-story development, which is significantly larger than anything that currently exists within the area. So I think on the grounds that this is integrated, compatible, and density height, those are in violation. I don't really have any other comments other than that. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Is there anyone else in opposition that wishes to speak? Certainly. Just please state your name and address, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jennifer Flood, and I live at 70 Summit. I don't have anything prepared because, like most of my neighbors, I just recently heard about this a day or two ago. I'm not opposed to the building, but I am opposed to the location of the building. As my fellow neighbors have said, it does not fit the aesthetics of the neighborhood. And my main concern is this is a park and rec area. Our city slogan is naturally gifted, and now we want to take away a parks and recreation area and build a 12-story building. And That's just my major concern of losing the natural habitat, migrating birds, animals, etc. And that's it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Flood. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak in opposition of the project? Certainly, go ahead.
Sean Kelly, 70 Summit Avenue. I'm probably going to fail on articulating my thoughts effectively, but I don't think this is probably the best spot to land or basically inject a building into our small group of residents. I would think that a project would add direct value to the people that already live there, and I'm kind of falling short on making that connection right now. I don't think you guys have really done a great job in explaining how it's really going to benefit the people that already live there. I think it consists largely of a lot of young couples like myself that are interested in preserving and maintaining the upkeep on a lot of these older structures. And I don't think that, planting this huge building in the middle of all this effort that we're putting forth is really going to encourage us to continue on down that path. So I don't know if that really hopefully comes across. But yeah, you guys got to give it some thought on maybe a better spot to place this structure. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition?
Hi, my name's Mark Brown, and I live in the Fort Creek area. And I'm in opposition to this development, not because the people who are doing it are nefarious in any way. The gentlemen who are doing it have done tremendous things for our community. They continue to do tremendous things for our community. Adding a new building would add necessary assessment. If you think about it, they're saying senior citizens are going to be moving to this building from our community. So it's not drawing assessment into our community. It's just moving people from their existing homes into this new dwelling. And so in that regard, it makes additional space available out in the community, but it won't draw seniors to our community. That takes things like doctors and that sort of thing. Now, I've heard a number of planning items that form the basis of a successful appeal for this. Number one, the height of the building doesn't match anything in the area that Mr. Peterson just talked about. The fact that it's not in the downtown core. That's a requirement of our official plan. So that would be a reason why an appeal of this would be successful. Also, it's not on arterial road. As Mr. Peterson said, that requires 3 lanes with a dedicated turning lane or 4 lanes. So these are all things that, should you approve this and give the developer the false hope, they're going to spend more money on this development, and at some point, they're going to be refused, and they will have wasted even more money. So the thing that I heard that made the most sense was that you give this time for the neighbors and the developer to get together so that they can come up with something that's suitable in height, and that will make them money, and that can be used as a precedent to maybe buy some lots along McDonald and have somebody else build a several-story apartment. And in that way, not have this sort of, gigantic bam of people coming in a 12-story building that doesn't fit in the neighborhood. Infill development should be measured. It shouldn't be this huge dropping of a 12-story building and then another dropping of another 12-story building, because once you set the precedent here, it's not going to be possible to say no to the next 12-story building. And so rather than give the developer false hope, have them get together and come up with a solution where they can add assessment to the community by building a necessary new development for seniors who want to move and make some space available that can people from Southern Ontario can move to and buy because it's so inexpensive. And in that way, not have this rapid sort of thing that doesn't work for anybody, because we're talking about planning here. We're talking about rules that regulate the pace of development. And in that way, you know, sure, if you allow this 12-story building, it's going to seemingly provide additional assessment, lots of it. But it's not really, and nobody's going to be happy. And, you know, somebody's going to make a lot of money, but, you know, people are going to be left by the wayside. So I would encourage you to defer this, as Ms. Arbus said, and let them get together and figure out something, if possible, that can be, you know, done in a measured pace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak in opposition of the proposal? No. Councillors? Any questions? Councillor Gardy?
Thanks, Madam Acting Mayor. My question is through you to Mr. Tenazzo. Mr. Tenazzo, the 120 meter or 400 feet area, which is provided the labels for the open house or for the neighborhood meeting, is that the typical radius?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, that is the typical radius. So the Planning Act is such that you have a choice. You can either put the notice in the Sioux Star or in a newspaper, or you can send out a 400-foot, 120-meter mail out to those that own property within 120 meters, 400 feet of the subject property. So we do both. Certainly, there's been some question here that we didn't expand that notice area, and typically we won't do that because then you're asking us to define a neighborhood. And if we expand it out to the west, if we go to Bruce Street, should we have gone to the other side of Bruce Street? Should we go further south on Summit Avenue or further down Ferris or Laird? So we tend to just stick with that 400 feet and then also put the notice in the newspaper.
Okay, can I have a follow-up question to that?
Certainly.
Through you to Mr. Tenazzo, would you consider this a typical build in a neighborhood based upon the number of builds over the course of the last several years?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, every application stands on its own.
In terms of its size, its location?
In terms of its size, this would be one of the bigger ones that we've looked at in the last few years, yes.
Right. Okay. When it's probably in the paperwork, which I didn't see in terms of the report. And if it's a question that I'm permitted to ask, quite frankly, I'll leave to someone wiser than I. Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Mr. Tenazzo or anybody else, when was the subject property sold to the developers?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I don't have that exact date, but the owners might.
Mr. Ruscio, Mr. Martella? June of this past year? Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions right now.
Thank you, Councillor Gardy. Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. I just want to throw out two questions, one to the developer and one to a general question to those that oppose it, if I may.
Certainly.
Okay. If I can just start with those individuals that kindly came to the microphone, I just want to ask you for a show of hands, if you don't mind. It sounds like most of you have lived in the neighborhood for a substantial amount of time, at least over 10 years. Would you agree? Okay. No? Okay. For those that have lived in the neighborhood before Collegiate Heights was built, how many of you opposed Collegiate Heights at the time? With show of hands. No one opposed Collegiate Heights? Okay, thank you. My other question is now to Mr. Ruscio. If you can take the mic, please. Mr. Ruscio, you're a well-known developer in this city. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe with your past projects, you have reached out to neighbors and you have had open houses, town halls, whatever you want to call them, to ask for feedback with your past projects. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Such as Simpson Street?
Well, that's my brother, but sure.
Okay.
I'm not involved, I wasn't involved with that one.
Okay. Have you, up to this point, or are you planning to have an open house with the neighborhood?
We did have one. We sent out notices in February, and we scheduled one for March 7th. So we did it based on instructions or advice from Peter Tenazzo. He provided us with the mailing list that he felt was appropriate or based on their criteria, and we followed their direction. So we had one. We had it at Our Lady Good Counsel Parish. There was 12 or 13 people. I thought it went reasonably well. There was one or two people that brought up a couple of concerns that we felt we addressed. And so, to be honest with you, up until the past couple of days, I thought it was a pretty straightforward application.
Okay. The concerns that the 12, 13, whatever that participated, were there any overlap concerns that are similar to these individuals that I'll outline tonight?
You're asking me to go by memory here. The one was an individual lived on Lansdowne, and it was the height. So the only issue was the height and his concern about views. So we followed up, and Tulloch, John McDonald prepared some sight line views that he felt were appropriate. So maybe I can ask John to kind of expand on that. That, to me, seems to be the biggest issue, and he could probably speak to that better than I can.
Okay.
He's the one who did the study. So they spent about a day with the shadowing and drawing the lines, which I believe was submitted as part of your report, and demonstrates that those sight lines were below the tree lines.
Okay.
But he can clarify that further.
Okay. And before we do that, one final question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In the past projects that your company has done, have you in the past made alterations to plans based on feedback you have received?
Yeah, I don't want to do anything that, I want to make everybody happy. The challenge, I think, with this project here is the geotechnical study that we did and the ground condition. It was going to make it very challenging to develop the site, perhaps at all, if we don't go up. The piling itself is probably $1 million expense. And if you do two buildings, then you have a $2 million expense. So it's, you have to shrink the footprint and you have to go up. So the whole project and the whole dynamic of the project really changes. And it's not just a matter of tweaking it, it'd be a matter of going back to the drawing board and seeing whether you want to do anything at all. I think the size, just like I had said previously, I know a lot of people who live in the finished rest home that live in there. And I remember the one person's comment, this couple that I know, I haven't been this happy since the day I was married, were their exact words. And, when you have the number of units there, it really builds a social environment. It's something that I was really looking forward to doing and providing a kind of a community in and of itself for people. And so for that reason, I thought it was a great thing for the Sioux and for people. I've had parishioners from good councils coming up to me that are very excited about the project. So I understand that there's no development that's going to make everybody happy, that's for sure. And things do change, and things could change in your very own backyard. That's just a reality of anything that of change in itself. So I just think that you have to look at everything overall. And there's advantages and disadvantages for sure. They're bringing up some valid points. I can't dispute that. So I think, what I ask council to do is look at the project on an overall basis and see if it's an appropriate development for the Sioux.
Okay, one final question for you. Would you be open to maybe possibly have another open house town hall?
I'd be open to it. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure what we're going to accomplish because I think we've received all of the points and we've researched all of the points. In the past, I would say 3 days, most of these points have really been coming forward. I'm really not sure. I don't completely understand why, in the past few days, but we scrambled and so that we can make sure that they were addressed tonight. And I feel between our team here, we have all the answers for that. So I think an open house is we're just going to kind of regurgitate the same issues and we'll have the same answers. So I don't know what another open house would do.
Okay.
But
Okay, thank you. And may I, Madam Acting Mayor, ask Mr. McDonald?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Ruscio. Mr. McDonald, if you could come up to the mic, please.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Ruscio was talking about, and in our outline here, about a site, I believe, a tree line site survey that you completed. Would you like to elaborate what you discovered?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor. I'm not sure if I can. Mr. Ruscio hit the nail on the head. We took somewhat of an approach thinking, what would they see if they stood on their back decks and they looked? And based on the elevation, the height, and maturity of the trees, they would see the trees before they would see the apartment. Having said that, if there is tree canopy loss in the fall and the winter, like we do have, they would see it through the but no different than what they would see as the house on McDonald or Puget Heights.
Okay. Thank you. And I do have one final question for our engineer.
Certainly.
Through you, Acting Madam Mayor, to Mr. Elliott. I believe there's a question that came tonight about some drainage, about the $5 million project the city worked on with regards to, I believe, a sewer or whatnot, and that there could be some potential cracking if this project goes ahead. In your professional view, should we be concerned about that?
Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that project is primarily a sewer that was on the other side of Pym Street, the east side of Pym Street, up to McNabb. There's an outlet structure at Gladstone that's constructed on the east side as well. I don't believe there's any cause for concern about the structural integrity of that structure if this building is constructed.
Okay. And in your professional opinion, the runoff, because it's a ravine, is there any concerns that the runoff natural watershed would be impacted?
Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, this as most developments or all developments now in the Sioux require that the runoff after the development does not exceed the runoff before the development. They have a storage pond, you'll see on the site plan. There's a storage pond where the runoff goes in there and it sits there and it's slowly allowed to go into the ravine. So that's what's required here. So there won't be any additional flow discharged to the ravine.
Okay. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dufour?
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. One of my first questions has to do with a repeated concern that have been brought up by residents concerning the impact of the slope stability and the soil conditions in the neighborhood. And so I was wondering if Mr. McDonald would be willing to come to the microphone and just, can you explain a little bit about what kind of geotechnical review process would be involved in the Conservation Authority permit for a development of this size?
Thank you, through you, Madam Acting Mayor. There is a past geotechnical report existing for the site. That, much like the surrounding area in terms of geology, does consist of a thin overburn layer underlain by a soft clay. In terms of slope stability, the piling allows the building to bear directly on the bedrock, and therefore it does not load the slope or that clay layer. That in itself mitigates the potential for slope failure as you're not loading and forcing out. The Sault Ste. Marie Region Conservation Authority through their application process for field regulated area. Deals primarily with stormwater management and with the slope stability. During detailed design, that is a component of what we have to submit in terms of detailed design, notes, design brief, et cetera, et cetera. So at that point in time is when we address those issues. At this time, it does not seem problematic. Sound engineering principles and standard design is essentially what's going to be followed.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up question, I know I'm kind of getting into hypothetical territory here, but in your professional opinion, what level of traditional excavation and footing load would this property be able to sustain were we to not do piles?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I would have to consult the geotechnical report. But if memory serves me correct, and again, this is, I think it's probably less than 250 pounds a square foot.
And
in terms of that's a very lightly loaded structure in terms of a single-story residential, maybe two-story residential type building.
Okay, that's kind of the point I'm trying to draw out here. It seems to me that this area without piling actually doesn't sustain very much development at all. It is kind of how I'm understanding it myself, and I'm looking for some guidance and confirmation based on your greater area of expertise. So what you're saying basically is this area could only sustain 1 or 2 stories
Correct.
Of a house at the most?
Correct.
Without using piling?
Potentially more, depending on how it's founded and the other factors, but
okay.
In a nutshell, structures that are consistent with the area.
Okay. And as far as the process of piling goes, will there be a review of adjacent structures for vibration damage, or is the process of the piling in this specific instance far enough from adjacent structures that that wouldn't be a concern?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, that's a very good question. There's a number of answers to this. The first is, for instance, the process taken by the City of Sault Ste. Marie in their construction projects is where we would go out ahead of the project and hire an independent insurance adjuster. Mm-hmm. They would request the neighborhood to go through the houses and document the pre-existing conditions. That protects both the homeowner and the developer in terms of facilitating and forbid that there could be a possible claim coming through. The second is the actual design of the piling. The geotechnical engineer, and I would have to defer to that, but when they're designing the pile and the set criteria, they determine the energy that they have to put into the pile in order to advance it and to set it into the final set. That can be adjusted to some extent. And with that, they can, we call it a wave propagation study. They can determine how far the energy travels in the soil and the magnitude of that when it gets to a certain distance away in structures. So it can be adjusted suitably.
Okay. Would the initial review be a requirement of the permitting process from the Conservation Authority, or is that something extra that the developer would consider doing for their own protection and the well-being of the residents' peace of mind?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, it would be the latter.
Okay. Yeah. So perhaps I can ask Mr. Ruscio if that would be something that, as a developer, if he would consider, should this pass, is that something you'd be interested in doing?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we, like I said, we want to do anything that cooperates with the neighborhood. So last thing we want to do is cause any damage, and there's always inconvenience with any kind of development, but we want to certainly do our best to minimize that. And so whatever it takes to do that, and that kind of working closely with our subcontractors and to make sure that things are done in an appropriate manner. So one more comment too that I wouldn't mind making if I could. Back to your point about the soil conditions only being able to sustain a 2 or 3 story building. My understanding with Chartwell is that they backed out because they couldn't make the numbers work. And so I think that further demonstrates, and at least corroborates what I'm trying to say, that you're stuck with the piling in order to make some kind of feasible project. And once you get into piling, you've got to recoup that cost of the piling, and you don't do it over a few stories. So that's part of the unfortunate part with this site. And then, really, to be honest, it's really the social kind of environment that I'm trying to create for the residents of this building. When you need a certain amount of units to kind of really build a community, and that's my goal here. So those are the two primary reasons why it's kind of got to go high.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Tenazzo. If I may, Mr. Tenazzo, just for the purposes of our official plan, how far is this subject property from the downtown border?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I think it's about 300 meters from the actual boundary of the downtown.
Okay, and where is the boundary of the downtown in our official plan?
Okay, so through you, Madam Acting Mayor, the defined boundary of the downtown in this area would be the rail line.
Does the official plan policy address issues like this right here, where we are, we're outside of the boundary by a very short distance? 350 meters is not very far in terms of land use planning, if I'm reading you correctly. Is there any language in the official plan that addresses this kind of scenario?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, again, I don't want to get into semantics, but at the end of the day, when you're looking at official plan policies, that's oftentimes what you're doing. And when this official plan policy that's been referenced a number of times was created, there was flexibility built into that policy based on the wording. So it's low and high density development should be integrated and compatible in density, height, and building setbacks, and I can speak to that. And then it says generally high-density development shall be restricted to major arterial streets. Again, the term generally prefaces this. And areas abutting the downtown core. It oddly enough doesn't say anything about within a downtown core, but this policy on its own was built to have some flexibility. And in this case, what we've determined is that when you look at the setbacks of the site, for starters, there's significant setbacks from not only the lot lines, but also the nearest dwellings. And again, I don't want to get into a debate about, the contiguous nature of different neighborhoods, but when I look at this site, I don't look at this as being an integral or contiguous part of, the Summit Avenue area, sort of southeast, or the Lansdowne, Laurier, Algoma Avenue area to the north-northwest. I look at this as being more of a bounding of those areas. So I look at those as separate contiguous subdivisions. And that this is almost I don't want to call it a focal point, and I don't want to say that it's a boundary or a barrier to those subdivisions, but at the end of the day, as was discussed earlier, McDonald Avenue is a fairly busy street, and it does act as a bit of a boundary. The vacant land to the east and south and northeast of the subject property, again, that acts as a bit of a boundary. The major ravine that runs north and west of the subject property, again, that's a boundary, in my opinion, between this property and the neighborhood to the northwest. So I don't necessarily look at this as being, in a micro sense, as being an integral part of a neighborhood that you really need to match things and make things really fit in. Because I look at this as kind of like an outward-looking, stand on its own property. And I hope that kind of answers your question.
It does. And just as a follow-up question, Mr. Tenazzo, in the Shape the Sioux's proposals for possibly designating certain areas as heritage, can you tell us where the boundary is for the Summit Avenue neighborhood possible subject heritage area?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, that boundary is basically, it's boron. So it's what's been called the upper Pym area, Pym Hill area, and that boundary is a fair bit south of this particular neighborhood that we're talking about, or neighborhoods.
Okay. My final questions are for those here who are opposed to the development. We've heard a little bit from people asking for things like a deferral, more consultation, more of an open house. And what I'm wondering from those who are opposed is, what is it that that you are interested in? Is it, because from what I've heard from the technical experts here is that a 2 or 3 story spread out development is just simply, due to the geology of the area, not possible. So what are some things that the developer would be able to do that is consistent with a high-rise that would help to ameliorate some of your concerns?
If you want to respond, can you please come up to the mic? Thank you.
Council, Acting Mayor, nothing. The high-rise is the problem. And to further, when you mentioned the boundary of the proposed heritage area, we're actually closer than the rail line. So if you want to talk boundaries, I don't know, we're closer to this proposed 12-story building. My concerns, as I mentioned before, were the actual 12-story building and the increase in traffic, which will lead to accidents, further maintenance on the roads, and pollution.
Does anyone else want to speak to Councillor Dufour's question? Just please come up to the mic.
So before I answer your question, Councillor Dufour, I just need to clarify a couple of things with Mr. Tenazo through you, Madam Acting Mayor.
Mr. Brown, this is a question for Mr. Dufour. So because we have other people in the galley that want to speak, can you just speak to Councillor Dufour's question right now, please?
Sure. Okay, so my understanding of what Mr. Tenazo said was that this is a separate neighborhood in and of itself in this space. And I further understood him to say that this is outside the downtown core. This is not on an arterial road, and it does not anywhere come close to being consistent with the height of the biggest building in the area. So that's my understanding of what he said. And under those circumstances, I think it would be appropriate for the developer, before he wastes any more money and loses an appeal, that he look at if he can still make a profit as a medium density development, which would limit the height, if my understanding is correct, to 5 stories. I think that would ameliorate some of the concerns of the neighbors, not all, because some of them just don't want anything. But I think it would sort of be a useful compromise if the developer can make money.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. This lady was next. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Loretta Harrison again. What I heard from Mr. Ruscio a few minutes ago is absolutely at the heart of the matter. He wants to build that huge, it's called the Gladstone monstrosity in our community. He wants to build that building. He wants the people in there to have their own little mini community with all their special rooms, which is great, with the view of the city, with the ravine, to the detriment of people who have lived there for very many years or have newly moved in with their children. And that is the key. Rich people, because they're going to have to be. At the meeting, and I did attend the meeting, Mr. Ruscio talked about the cost of rent. Okay? And those people won't fit into our community because the people in our neighborhood don't make those kinds. Okay? It's a community. It's affordable. You can bring your children. Our children walk to the park to play. And maybe I wasn't supposed to know it, but I did. They played in the ravine. There's a little rivulet. So that's the heart of the matter. 5 stories I could think about. I look out my window on her street. You can look there. You wouldn't think that I could see Collegiate Heights, but I can, and I have no problem with that. I'm pretty short. I would have to lean far, far back to see the top of a 12-story building. And there is room in the city for 12-story buildings. You don't have to ruin our home for it. I hope you will, at least at a minimum, consider deferral. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. Is there anyone else that wishes to respond to Councillor Dufour's question? Councillor Dufour, do you have any more questions?
No, I would just like to point out that as my ward mate, you had a whole list of great questions, and I hope you will also ask them, even though you're acting mayor right now.
I'm last on the list. Councillor Bruni?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess my question to Mr. Tonazo, you did have a neighborhood meeting, and you said there was 12 to 13 people that showed up. And all the concerns were addressed, but the number one concern is the height. What were some of those concerns that the residents in the area brought up that Mr. Ruscio has taken care of? Would you?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I'm not exactly sure. So certainly in the report, my general sense, and as stated in the report, is that those that were in attendance at the open house seemed to be generally agreeable with what was happening. As far as the concerns that I certainly was privy to, and there were some side conversations that happened. Certainly there was one gentleman, Mr. Barron, who has sent a letter in, and his concern was overlook to his property on Lansdowne, I believe. But I don't know if really there was a negotiation that happened where somebody said, okay, I've got this concern, and then it was addressed. That, I wasn't privy to those conversations.
Oh, okay. I guess to Mr. Ruscio, were there concerns brought up besides the height? And were those concerns addressed?
Not that I recall. I mean,
So
the
there was
height, the height was the major things. There was things like, the construction inconvenience and those kind of things. So if there were other items, then they would have been minor in nature from what I remember. I'm doing my best I can to remember because I don't want to mislead anyone, but it was the height. And so that's when we went through the exercise of doing those sight lines, and I asked John McDonald so that we can address that concern. And so that's what we did. And so any major concerns, we did whatever we had to do to address them, we felt.
Okay. Just stay there for a second. I just want to go back to Mr. Tonazo. Madam, the concern was brought forward about the increased traffic. What would the city do with the increased traffic? Are any roads redesigned, or are we going to try to adopt something into this blueprint plan?
Through you to Madam Acting Mayor, a couple things on that. So in terms of, there was some concerns with congestion, parking. This development is providing, or this proposal is providing a surplus of parking beyond what we require as a minimum. So I believe 90 units, we require, so it's 1.25 spaces per unit. So we require 113, they're providing 136. So I'm comfortable, I'm confident that there's enough off-street parking for this development that you're not gonna have people parking on whether it's Gladstone or McDonald. And I believe McDonald is no parking in this area anyways. Yeah. In terms of increased traffic, so McDonald is a collector street. It's very close to 2 arterial streets, that being Bruce and Pym. McDonald Avenue, so these numbers that I have are from 2012. McDonald Avenue west of Pym has about 3,504 vehicles per day. That's east and westbound. Grosvenor, which is McDonald Avenue extended. Just east of Bruce has about 4,200 vehicles per day. I'm of the opinion, and I believe the applicant's consultant has looked at traffic demand, and there are some rule of thumbs. I believe the conservative rule of thumb in this case is each unit generates about 7.5 vehicle trips per day, which again is a sort of a high conservative number, I believe. So in our opinion, this road network is capable of handling the traffic that will be generated from the 90-unit apartment building, I guess to put it simply.
On the map here, or the drawing, there's one entry from Gladstone. That's entry and exit?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, that's correct. So given the geometry of McDonald Ave, that's a difficult spot to put an intersection there. So everything is coming and going through Gladstone.
Okay. And I missed a little bit of what Mr. Councillor Dufour was saying regarding the pile driving. How are the residents protected again? Would you be able to go through that process? Especially, there was one lady stated about her house is out of stucco and plaster.
We'll leave this to the smart engineers here.
Thank you, Mr. Russo, for those kind words. Through you, Madam Acting Mayor. The first is what we would refer to as the pre-construction survey. The owner typically would procure an independent insurance adjuster to visit and record the existing conditions of the structures and the property.
Okay. So before you go forward, the owner's responsible?
It would be
for that, not the developer.
I'm sorry, I believe they're the one and the same in this instance.
I'm sorry?
The owner is the developer in this instance.
The owner of the house or?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Russo. Yes, the developer, yes.
The developer will hire an insurance company to go and view these homes before any pile driving occurs?
Correct.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead now.
I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. And the second would be during the actual piling design with the adjustment of the energy put into the pile in order to advance it. And they can determine, based on the geotechnical characteristics, the intensity of the vibrations at certain distances away.
Okay. And what's the radius? What would the radius be, which for the homes to be inspected by Mr. Russo?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is something that I would have to refer to the geotechnical consultant on. I wouldn't be able to tell you at this point in time.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, were you referring to the pre-construction survey? The radius for the pre-construction survey or for the piling?
No, before they go and they take snapshots of the residents' homes?
Yeah,
before the pile driving starts?
Yeah, the geotechnical engineer would actually make that recommendation to Mr. Russo in consultation with his insurance adjuster.
So we don't know the radius? No?
Not
You don't
yet.
know now?
Yes.
Okay. No, I'm just asking questions here.
Yep.
I guess to the lady, our first speaker, Mrs. Harrison, just a question. You mentioned, you know, it's not affordable housing. If it was affordable housing, would you agree to this project?
You're asking me to speak off the cuff, which I have difficulty doing. But first of all, I would like the data, and I would assume that the councillors would too, because to build something in your, you know, we have so many empty homes that aren't being purchased. But if there is a need for affordable housing, then those tend to be, in my opinion, I'm sure you have social workers or something in the city who could give you an accurate thing, but I would think if it's going to be affordable housing, those people would probably have children. And I would not want children living in a 12-story building. If you told me you were building a smaller building that was affordable. The people with children could buy it or rent it, and the children could play in the ravine or the park, or don't forget that great big area that I think you might have a firehouse planned for, the old King George site. So.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Hilsinger.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Mr. McDonald, can you help me understand what may seem like an obvious question, but how these sightline diagrams work? I kind of wish they were. I can't seem to figure out how to turn them. But are they two-way or one-way? As in, is the line of sight from the top of the building to the homes and the homes to the building, or is there two-way? So if I'm looking at this diagram correctly, this is just one of them. It looks like the first one on this list. The homes that are, if I have my directions right, to the south on Lansdowne Avenue will not be able to see the top of the apartment building?
To you, Ms. Acting Mayor. Correct. The top of the trees would be above the sight line in order to see that building.
Okay, thank you. For Mr. Ruscio, did you consider other locations for your development?
Well, this is the only one that we have that we feel is appropriate for this type of development.
Why?
We don't.
Why?
Because we don't own any other land that would.
Okay.
That's conducive to what we want to do. And we purchased it in mind for retirement, so, and then as we progressed along.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm not really certain if this is a proper question to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyways. And if somebody wants to tell me
Mr. White will probably let you
it is
know.
not, you may do so. How do you feel about what the residents have said?
Well, it's disappointing that that they feel that way. I would have to say I don't agree with the concerns. I think I'm the type of guy that wants to do things that are appropriate and respectful to everybody concerned. At the end of the day, I go forward to what I think is fair and right and appropriate in the circumstances. I think Peter Tanazzo, I consulted with him in a larger, based on the sound planning principles that you want to follow. The feedback that I got from sight lines, from the buffers that are around the area, I'm of the opinion that it is appropriate, and that's my honest opinion. If it wasn't, I wouldn't do it. And I go to church across the street there. I consider that part of my neighborhood too. In that respect, I grew up in the McDonald area. I'm the kind of guy that wants to do things that are right, and I feel that it's an appropriate development. So I understand a lot of people don't want to see change a lot of times. I mean, I had a high school built in my own backyard a couple of years ago, so I get it. I had bush, but it was something that I accepted because I thought that it wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't. It was property that was rezoned to institutional, and then I ended up with a high school in my backyard. So it's there's change, and sometimes you don't like to see that change because you're used to certain ways and certain habits, but that's my opinion. So whether that response is appropriate or not, I don't know.
You're not the one that has to do it the right way. And further to Councillor Hollingsworth's question, with now further discussion, is there anything that you think that you could do to work with the residents to affect their concerns?
I don't know if there's anything that I can, because like I said, a lot of the costs are really in the foundations, in the piling, and the type of development that we want to do, a combination of costs and what we want to accomplish with a retirement community. This is what makes most sense, and this is what makes the numbers work, unfortunately. I think that's why Chartwell had a conditional offer on the site and ended up having to walk away from it because they just couldn't make it work.
Thank you.
Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. A bunch of my questions have been answered, but I just have a few. We'll start with Mr. Tenazzo. Actually, it's about the traffic, further to what Councillor Bruni was saying. So overall, you're not seeing any issues with the traffic if this goes through?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, McDonald Avenue the roads in that area are designed to accommodate the type of traffic increases that we're looking at with this building.
Okay, so there's no concern with traffic in that sense. Now, I know that one of the residents did bring up a concern about, crossing the road and that kind of traffic. Would there be any lights looked at, any pedestrian crossings, anything of that sort to be added?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, this development doesn't necessarily warrant a light at this point in time. Certainly, it's one of those awkward situations, and the geometry of the road is such that is a difficult spot to cross. If you want to go directly, shortest route possible from this building to the seniors' residence, that's a tough spot to cross, but that's just the nature of it. And in locating this building, sort of pedestrian crossover, the building's not in the best location for that. The building's in a much better location in terms of lessening the impacts of overlook and softening kind of the view of that building from the surrounding areas. So suffice to say that those wishing to cross that portion of roadway, may be prudent to walk over to Gladstone and cross there.
Okay, and another question in regards to a point that Mr. Peterson had brought up. He mentioned that the closest green space would be Bruce Park. Do you know the distance, roughly, from that? Let's say from this building to Bruce Park.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I don't have that distance at my fingertips, unfortunately.
Yeah. Pardon? 200 meters? Okay, thank you. So I'm just going through my list here. You know what? I think for the most part, most of my questions have been asked and answered. So I think right now I'm good. Thank you.
Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Ms. Acting Mayor. My questions have been asked, especially regarding the pile driving and protection for the neighbors, and a couple of questions I had for the opponents' speakers have been answered as well. So thank you. I'm good.
Good. Okay. Now it's my turn. I'd like to direct questions to Mr. Ellis. I don't want him to feel neglected. Mr. Ellis, could you give us a brief summary of the design of the building, especially in terms of, are there going to be balconies and that sort of thing, and just summarize the design for us, please?
Most certainly. The building does have some balconies and some units without balconies. We've essentially taken the balconies out of the easterly side, which would be the ones kind of overlooking McDonald Avenue. There are some balconies on the south and the north, and again, not any to speak of on the west side. So we'll call them large windows instead, but no actual balconies. The only balconies that we do have on the easterly side are on the very upper stories in some of the public rooms, like the gymnasium and that sort of thing, which we put up high to get the views. So people are not going to be basically looking out of their bedrooms down into the neighborhood below.
So the private units do not have balconies, it's just the common areas?
The two most three most upper floors have balconies. All the ones below it, as far as the units go, do not, but there's 2 floors of public space that has balcony. And we're not really expecting people to be really out on the balcony in the gymnasium, for example.
Okay, but you're putting a balcony outside the gymnasium merely for
Yes.
aesthetics?
For aesthetics and also to open the window, let's say to cool it down, that sort of thing.
Are there any other highlights of the design that you can share with us?
Well, if you want to start with the basic premise, I know there's been some concern over the environment, and I would like to address that. A large home, for example, has a very large surface area, the envelope, and that is very inefficient. The most efficient building one can provide and build is a high-density building in a simple rectangular shape. That minimizes considerably the building envelope and therefore the energy conservation. In addition, the type of construction that we're using, which is an ICF block, is very similar to what we're doing with the very low energy use waterfront building down on the replacement for the RITAC. It has extremely high R values and much higher than what would be used in a standard single-family home. And therefore, again, it has a higher level of environment. One would say that you're probably using a fraction of the energy to heat and cool this building than you would an equivalent number of single-family or, let's say, low-density homes, because, you know, there's the roof, most of the heat escapes through the roof. We've got a very small roof for the footprint, et cetera, et cetera. So it also, being close to the downtown, it is not contributing to what we call urban sprawl. You're trying to keep it within the existing fabric of the city as opposed to expanding the city. So therefore, any car driving and whatever has shorter distance to go. I live in that neighborhood, and one of the appealing things to me is that I say exactly the same distance to go up the highway to the strip development up there to the stores that it is to go downtown. It's extremely efficient that way. So as far as the environment, whatever goes, I think it's actually far superior. The other thing that one should note is the fact that we are going up, we are using less of the land mass. Therefore, there is more green space on the site. Half the site we're not allowed to build on whatsoever, regardless, because it's a ravine. So we're not even taking that into consideration. But if one were to put, let's say, even 60 units versus the 90 maximum that we're looking at, it would cover far more of the site. So you'd have more paving, more hard surface, which again is not really sound environmentally. And therefore, quite frankly, the way you build a bigger city, for example, a lot of high rises and high density, is more efficient for public transportation, for walking, et cetera, than you would get if you did a suburban type scheme. So additionally, if one is to utilize materials, yes, we have not got a design that looks like the existing neighborhood. I live in a century house myself in that neighborhood. And when one tackles that from a design point of view, one is addressing an existing building, and that building, you look at it in any way possible that enhances it. But when you do a new development, one does not try to make it fake to replicate what's around it. You make it true to itself. You make it true to modern materials. So we are using wood and glass and brick, the same materials that are used on the houses surrounding it, but let's say in a different, more contemporary way. So yes, it doesn't match, but a large high-rise building done in Tudor style or something just doesn't make any sense. So from that point of view, that sort of is synopsis of the design.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis.
Thank you.
I have some questions for Mr. Ruscio. Most of my questions have been answered. Thanks, everyone else. Mr. Ruscio, in terms of you know, your demographics, your market research in terms of this building, what will be the average, and from my understanding is it's primarily rentals with some condo potentially?
No, as of now, it's all rentals.
All rentals. So what is going to be the range of the monthly rent in this building?
Well, we still have to finalize that, and it really is going to come down to costs. So I'll have everything finalized. We won't know for a few months, but
A range?
16 to 1,800 type thing.
Okay.
A month, yeah.
16 to 1,800.
Yeah.
Now you're not going to deem this as senior residence. But do you anticipate families wanting to move in? Do you think it's going to be primarily empty nesters? And where have you sort of gotten your market research for this proposal?
To be honest with you, the finished rest home development that they just did, they have 83 units, and I think they have just as many people, if not more, waiting to get in. And so it'd be pretty consistent with that. So if I had to give you a comparison, that's probably your best one.
So you're going off of what was built at the finished rest home?
And then just my own experience being in the rental business. I've got a property management business, and so you have a good feel of what the demand is. And you just look at the vacancy rates in the SUS through CMHC. So you have that to go by, and you look at the SUS demographics, which is, I don't think it's any secret that it's an aging community. And yeah, so that's, and at the end of the day, you're never going to know until you press the button and go forward. That's the risk. If everybody knew, then everybody would probably try to do it. Yeah, so.
Okay.
Maybe just to expand on Dave, you were asking about some of the amenities. In terms of the landscaped areas, there's some on the outside, like individual gardens that are kind of individual plots that are elevated for seniors. So a lot of the design, and I'm not just saying our target market is the seniors, but we're going to really designing it so that it's conducive to senior living. So anything from like covered parking that they really like to have, gardens, but they can't bend anymore, so you elevating it off the ground for them. Those types of aspects to the design is what we're trying to do. An arts and crafts room, so they have a place to kind of convene and drink coffee with their common kitchen and exercise room and that kind of stuff. So we're trying to build a community with the common areas.
Are some of the, you're talking about seniors and having mobility issues, are some of the units going to have accessible washrooms?
Yes.
And what percentage, or is that to be determined?
We're at 15%. 15% that is for each type of unit, so 50% one bedroom, 50% two bedrooms. And we have probably 50% more accessible parking spots than required by the
Yeah, I did notice that, thank you. In terms of the greenscape, those gardens and things would just be restricted for the residents that are living in your building?
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ruscio.
Okay.
Mr. Tatso, traffic has been brought up quite a few times, and I do know this neighborhood well. I went to St. James School, which is no longer there, and I used to get in trouble going down into the ravine. I grew up on Pym Street. 315. I know the back laneways well, and I know that across from Our Lady of Good Counsel Church, there used to be a confectionery store where I think we could go with a quarter and get a pop and a bag of chips, because I'm old. So, Mr. Kelly appreciated that. So traffic. Has there been, we're talking about traffic, and I know those streets well. I do go to Chartwell quite often. I hang out with some of the residents there and have helped out a little bit there. There has not been a formal study, correct, on the impact of those 90 units on traffic?
To you, Madam Acting Mayor, no, there has not been a formal study completed on that.
Okay. And to repeat, with the 90 units, what was the in and out, the daily activity rate of vehicles?
So to you, Madam Acting Mayor, again, a conservative, vehicle trips per day would be 7.5 trips per unit.
7.5 trips per unit.
So that would be
per day.
Going out would be one, coming back would be the second one. So there's 7.5 trips per day times 90 units. You'd be looking at potentially 675 vehicles per day, per 24-hour period coming out onto Gladstone.
And from my understanding, there has been no consideration for either a light or and I know crossing that street is very treacherous, or any crosswalk at this point?
To you, Madam Acting Mayor, our traffic folks were circulated this application, Public Works was circulated this application, and at no time did anybody suggest that we had a traffic issue here and that we needed to, in their opinion, study it further. It was felt that the current infrastructure can handle the increased traffic.
And I do know that notice was sent with the 400 feet geographical area. Do you know exactly, because with the ravine there, I do find that a bit confusing as to exactly what streets and what general streets and addresses potentially, and how many were sent out?
Madam Acting Mayor, so there was a total of 96 letters that went out. These go to property owners in the area, so 96 letters went out from our office. We do keep a map on file, so I do have a map that shows exactly who got, geographically which addresses actually were sent letters. And it certainly went through, the eastern part of Lansdowne, Hearst, and then to the southeast, it would have went to, I guess, the northern third of, that would be Ferris, Gladstone, a few properties on the west side of Laird Street. Again, I almost have to put the map, show you the map to really describe it.
Okay. And it was listed in the paper,
So,
the notice?
Madam Acting Mayor, yes, so we put the notice in the Sioux Star as well as the mail out within 400 feet.
And what, do you know what date it was in the Sioux Star? Sorry.
No, I have that. Madam Acting Mayor, that was in the Sioux Star on March 9th.
March 9th?
March 9th.
So it was in the Sioux Star after the community meeting?
Madam Acting Mayor, yes. So the way that it works is the applicant in this case had actually applied, but he had sent out his own notice. So
Yes.
when we have these neighborhood open houses, it's the applicant or the developer that runs that meeting. So they had sent out their notices to say, yes, we're having an open house. And then I believe the ad would have went in the Sioux Star 2 days after the open house.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any further questions. Are there any comments? Mr. Martella?
Joe asked me not to come up here, but I have to make a few comments through you, Madam Acting Mayor and Council. This property, looking at the traffic study and what has to be done for traffic, we're hoping that, and we do know by people that we know, that there's a lot of snowbirds that will be living 6 months of the year out of town. So, I mean, the traffic, we're hoping 30 to 40% just from who we know. So that should reduce the traffic completely. Also, my biggest question is to the city. Knowing that they listed this property over the last 3 years or 4 years, what did they think was going to happen with this property now that we bought it? The park is going to be gone, as sad as it is, but it was listed for someone to develop it. And we were the lucky ones at the time to develop this property. It was used as a snow dump for 30 years. And if you look at the city and you look at the snow dumps right now, and I think, Mr. Girardi, you can say that you're probably sorry to let it go because there is a need for more snow dumps because of the increased snowfall. These snow dumps are in excess of 100 feet high. And normally it takes till July for them to melt. That snow dump was there for 30 years. I traversed it. I lived in the area. It was always an eyesore. It contained salt, contaminants. The only thing we're going to do to this property is improve it. And I feel bad for the residents, and I feel their pain. But at the end of the day, I think we're improving the site as opposed to being a negative. And, hoping that the people that live there are going to add value to the property and bring friendship to the area. So, I mean, in terms of traffic, site, I think it's a good thing. I mean, we've got older people, including my parents, that need a place to stay in the next 10 years. And we're just preparing because it's going to happen. And eventually, where are we going to put them? It's central. It's close to the hospital. It's close to downtown. It makes good, it's a good property to build on. And again, not in my backyard. We all have things happen in our backyard, and we either progress or regress. And those are the only comments I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martella. There won't be any more comments from the floor.
Point of order, they were allowed to address the the forest side was allowed to have a second chance at addressing it, and you have to provide, according to the rules, the procedure bylaw, you have to provide the opposing side a second chance.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, and to Council. Mr. Brown, the opponents have had their say. The applicants have had their say. It's now in Council's hands, and Council is about to head into comments. You could ask Council.
Council, do you have any comments? Councillor Dufour?
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. I would just like to wrap this up by saying that this has definitely been one of the more conflicting issues that I've had to deal with as a ward councillor. As a ward councillor for the residents who have come, I have called everyone back. I've read all of your letters. I've responded to most of your emails. Even though most of them only came over this past weekend. And I do hear your concerns, but at the same time, as a member of council, I'm tasked with balancing those very real, legitimate, and valid concerns with the overall needs of the city and with the opportunity that a growth like this development provides. And because of that, I will be supporting this project.
Councillor Gardy?
From what I heard, I think the residents should take some solace in that Mr. Ruscio and Mr. Marcella are looking to in their words, improve the neighborhood. They're also going to do what they need to do, I hope they are, to alleviate concerns about the structural integrity of the homes as a result of the development. I struggle with this one. I listen to both sides. I'm hopeful that the developers will work with the neighborhood moving forward, and I'm going to be voting in favor of the development.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone in this gallery that came tonight from the community, from the neighborhood. Each of you took time to prepare your notes, and I know that over the weekend, even over the last 24 hours, you went out and spoke with your neighbors, knocking at the doors and asking for feedback. Our community is about just what you have done, coming to the microphone, coming to us, writing letters, and voicing your opinions. So that takes effort, that takes a lot of organization, and thank you. I was in your situation not too long ago, and I couldn't even say my concerns. So thank you again for coming to us. Also, I wanted to say thank you to the developers. You are local, you are a local family, and you have invested a great deal in this community, not just through developing, but also through other charitable organizations. We talked about volunteering tonight, being the volunteering week next week, and all of you have given your heart and soul to this community, and I thank you for that as well. And most of all, thank you for listening to tonight's concerns and also taking that step and having the open house. Local developers are part of our community, and also working with staff is important. So thank you for coming tonight as well. This is an important project, obviously, for this community, and I know that our Ward 1 councillors, or I should say Ward 2 councillors, have spent a lot of time in organizing their own thoughts and reaching out to the constituents. We are a community. We all care about where this community is going, and we do have a good heart. So as we consider tonight's project, I'm sure that we all have the best interests at heart. Thank you.
Councillor Scott?
Thank you. Just because they won't give me a wireless mic, I'm not going to turn around so I can speak to the mic here. I would like to thank everybody for coming and expressing their concerns, for the emails. I would also like to thank the developers for coming, taking time out of their night to be here. I've heard both sides, and I understand both sides. And like my counterpart, Councillor Gardy, I did struggle with this one. So I just want to make sure that I thanked everybody involved and keep up the good work on all sides.
No. If no one has further comments, you can call for the vote.
So we're going to call for the vote?
All those in favor?
This is my first acting mayor gig, of course. Everyone in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Madam Acting Mayor, members of council, this takes us to the final report on the planning agenda. That is 7.7.4, A919Z, OP second units. Report of the senior planners attached for the consideration of council, and a motion by Councillor Scott and Dufour. Resolved that the report of the senior planner concerning application A919ZOP be received, and that both official plan amendment number 223 as attached and the amendment to the zoning bylaw 2005-150 as attached be approved, and that the legal department be directed to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect this approval.
No, we're done.
So we'll go to you, Mr. Donazo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Second unit. So this is a result of the Strong Communities Through Affordable Housing Act, which subsequently amended the Planning Act, thereby requiring municipalities to permit second units in single detached dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, multiple attached dwellings, or within ancillary or accessory structures associated with these dwellings. So examples would include basement apartments, apartments above a garage in the backyard, or even a standalone structure on the property. It really hits on two provincial priorities, one being affordable housing. It's recognized that these types of units often are affordable in nature. It also provides homeowners with an ability to generate, a rental income to help them sort of pay the mortgage and get into the homeownership game. It also speaks to aging in place, where oftentimes you'll have parents, children, or caregivers that wish to maybe live with mom and dad, but not with mom and dad and have their own space. So this really gets at that. The recommendation is to approve an official plan amendment as well as the zoning amendment to permit second units, subject to a number of regulations, and I'm certainly available to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Donazo. Council, do you have any questions on this matter? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. That brings us back to consent.
That does.
So we're back on consent, council. We left the matter on ATVs. Mr. Scott, Councillor Scott, I was with you on 6.13. Status update on ATV bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, my question was similar to what Councillor Hollingsworth was, I thought, where she was going with this. So we do have a bylaw in regards to snow machines. And do we happen to know the boundaries of that? Have we looked at maybe just replicating that for ATV use?
So it's a very different issue, I think. So I don't think they're looking at just replicating one bylaw to the other. I'm going to keep all your questions, though, related to this bylaw and not the snow machine bylaw.
Okay, I just wanted to see if it was something that we would have looked at. So then, carrying on to that, I do have another question. You know what, I didn't have it written down, so just skip me. I don't remember my other question. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to go to, are you on this matter, Councillor Bernie? I thought maybe your hand was up there, I saw.
No, I'm just.
Anybody else on this matter? So we're going to get off this matter. So Councillor Shoemaker, you have matters on consent?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. 6 point, it's the waste collection 1 bylaw update, 6.16.
Okay, go ahead.
Through you to Ms. Hampton Beach, who is here. Ms. Hamilton Beach, I see you have a green bin here. Is this what the new garbage bin will be for the city of Sault Ste. Marie?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. Yes, that sure is. Hot off the presses, well, they were made a few days ago, but shipped into town, certainly for the community to see and for yourself to check out.
So the new bylaw itself, which is under the bylaw section, talks about size and weight stipulations for garbage. I think it's section 3 sub 1 of the new bylaw. The gross weight limit of the cart and the waste shall be 200 pounds for the 240 liter rollout cart. So is this the new standards? I guess my question is the 2-bag limit gone?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, correct. Right now, the limit would ultimately be 1 cart, as full as you can get it within those weight restrictions. And any bags beyond that, if you have extra waste, you can in fact use the bags and the bag tag system that is currently in place.
Okay. And these will be delivered to everybody in the community, every household?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, starting May 6th, they will begin to be delivered throughout the community. So I'm not sure how many of you remember the recycling cart distribution, but it went quite well, quite quickly, and it will become effective and begin collection as of July 3rd. July 2nd, my apologies.
So can we use the bin between May 6th and July 3rd?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Shoemaker, no, you cannot.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions on that item. Thank you.
Anybody else on that item? Seeing none. Councillor Shoemaker, anything else?
The waste collection item just before that, holiday waste collection,
Okay.
and comparators with other municipalities. If I remember from a previous report, Ms. Hamilton Beach, there was, well, it says it right here in the motion that was brought forth on April 9th of last year. There was anticipated to be a $50,000 overtime savings annually if there was not this holiday waste collection schedule that we're currently using. So I see Thunder Bay operates a 4-day, 10-hour waste collection schedule. Is that something the Sioux could consider?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. Yes, the Sioux may consider that. We now have actual values in from our contractor because that option was part of the proposal call, and the savings are in fact would be less than the $50,000, as their bid price for a 4-day collection was in fact higher than the 5-day collection.
And do we know what the $50,000 would be now?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I don't have that exact value. I would have to work through what in fact our function would look like, assess our equipment needs and our manpower needs to serve a 10-hour day and the 4-day week.
Okay, but in any event, less than 50,000.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Shoemaker, yes, I am estimating substantially less than the 50,000.
Okay. All right, those are my questions on that matter, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else on that matter? Councillor Shoemaker, do you have anything else on the consent agenda?
No.
Any other councillors on the consent agenda? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, can I have the motion, please?
I have a motion by Councillors Scott and Dufour, resolved that all items listed under date 2019-0401, Agenda Item 6, Consent Agenda and Addendum be approved as recommended.
All in favor? Carried. Councillor Vezo-Allen.
6.1.
Okay, you've declared that, so I think we're in good shape.
It's fine? Okay.
Yes, no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, it's declared, so
Okay.
it goes through with consent, but you're
Okay.
not conflicted. Mr. Clerk?
This brings us to Section 8 of the agenda. Under Section 8.1, disable advanced traffic signals between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. Motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Scott. Whereas many traffic signals in Sault Ste. Marie have advanced signals for the better movement of traffic during peak hours, and whereas many drivers have experienced the situation where no other vehicles are at the intersection and the advanced traffic signal is illuminated, and whereas off-peak traffic hours, advanced traffic signals serve only to delay vehicles for a longer period of time at intersections. And whereas delaying vehicles at intersections when such a delay is unwarranted adds to carbon emissions. Now therefore be it resolved that staff be requested to report on the feasibility of disabling advanced traffic signals at all or mostly all of the intersections in the city with advanced signals from 9 p.m. nightly until 6 a.m. in the following morning.
Okay, Councillor Shoemaker, do you want to speak to this?
Just briefly, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Obviously, the motion's pretty self-explanatory, I think. When you're sitting at a traffic signal late at night and there is nobody in any direction, yet the green arrow goes, flashes before you, and you're wanting to go straight, or there's nobody in the turning lane, you think, this could be a much more efficient system. So I'm hoping that staff can look at it and determine. I've put 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. Nightly. Obviously, staff, I think, would come back with a recommendation if they thought that different hours worked better. But, I think it's worth looking into whether or not this is something that is feasible to do.
Okay, any other questions or comments on that motion? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I just have a comment, and I'm glad that Councillor Shoemaker was saying about perhaps the time might be altered slightly. I'm just considering the summertime. 9 o'clock might be a little bit early, but again, we look forward to receiving the staff's report and focusing on those hours and taking consideration summertime when traffic is busy still after 9 o'clock, where Station Mall and other retailers are just closing. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion's carried.
Under agenda item 8.2, traffic signal intersection changes, a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian. Whereas Sault Ste. Marie's policy during capital roadworks projects is to remove unwarranted traffic signals during the reconstruction, and whereas the removal of a traffic signal generally leads to an adjustment period for motorists who frequently travel the area to familiarize themselves with the new traffic control pattern, and whereas when traffic signals are removed that control all four corners of an intersection, they are typically replaced by a stop sign that only controls traffic at 2 of the 4 corners of the intersection. And whereas it is not currently Sault Ste. Marie's policy to include a flashing red light above the traffic signal as a default at the time of the change from a traffic signal controlled intersection to a stop sign controlled intersection, and whereas a flashing red light above the stop sign could be an effective way to assist motorists who frequently travel an area where there has been a change in the traffic control pattern to familiarize themselves with the new traffic control pattern, now therefore be it resolved that the Public Works and Engineering Services be requested to amend the current policy for major capital works to provide that when unwarranted traffic signals are removed from an intersection, the stop signs that are installed at the intersection have flashing red lights above them for a period of not less than 1 year.
Okay, Councillor Shoemaker.
Mr. Mayor, this stems actually out of some comments that you had a number of, it was sometime last term, that said, that suggested to staff that this would be a best practice. When lights are removed, at least temporarily for an adjustment period, flashing red beacon should be installed above the stop sign just to get people used to the new orientation of the intersection. I hadn't seen anything come forward to formalize that, so that's the intent of this motion.
Any other comments or questions on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion's carried.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, our next motion, as Councillor Dufour is a mover, I'm going to suggest we move on to bylaws until he returns to the room.
Okay, let's move on to bylaws.
We have 2 bylaws that need to be read separately. Bylaw 2019-63, 267 Cathcart Street, Dave Ellis Architecture, Inc. A motion by Councillors Gardy and Vezo-Allen. Resolved that bylaw 2019-63 being a bylaw to amend the Sault Ste. Marie zoning bylaws 2005-150 and 2005-151 concerning lands located at 267 Cathcart Street, David Ellis Architecture, Inc., be passed in open council this first day of April 2019.
All in favor? Carried.
Now that Councillor Dufour is back, we'll move back to the motion. by Councilors Dufour and Hollingsworth, whereas the city requires residential developers to provide a letter of credit when they begin a development, and whereas it can be challenging for a smaller residential developer to provide a letter of credit prior to beginning a development, and whereas the city has accepted performance bonds but does not generally do so for residential developments, and whereas smaller developers who may not be able to offer a line of credit may be able to post a performance bond, and whereas the city wants to make every reasonable effort to be development friendly, now therefore be it resolved that City Council requests staff to consider accepting performance bonds in lieu of letters of credit and report back to City Council on the appropriateness and advisability of doing so.
Councillor Dufour, do you want to speak to this?
Sure, just very briefly, I think that this resolution could possibly lead to having better competition within our city, stronger for our construction industry, and I think it's a good thing to investigate.
Yeah, it comes as a result of some sessions we had with our local development community. Councilor Nero attended those sessions. There was a comment that was made by some of the smaller developers, so we're going to get some advice from staff on it. We'll make a decision when staff comes back with that report. All in favor? Carried.
The other bylaw that needed to be read separately was 2019-75. Motion by Councilors Gardy and Dufour, resolve the bylaw 2019-75 being a bylaw to authorize an agreement between the city and the Sault Ste. Marie Professional Firefighters Association, Local 529, be passed in open council this first day of April 2019.
You don't have Councillor Gardy in here, so can we switch him
Oh,
out to
yes.
Councillor Shoemaker?
Sure.
All in favor? Carried. Mr. Clerk, when you get to bylaw, are the rest of them omnibus?
Yes.
Because Councillor Bruni indicated to me as a question about bylaw 2019-66, Councillor Bruni?
Okay.
11.1.7?
That's right. That's
Tax ratio?
Yeah, so we're doing the rest of them omnibus, so if you have a question about one of them, it'd be best to ask it now, and we can get to the answer.
I guess my question will go to Ms. Shao regarding the
Tax ratios?
tax ratios from 2018 to 2019. I commend you regarding the commercial, the shopping centers, office building, the small industrial, the large industrial, and the multi-residential have come down. But the residential has gone up by about 0.75%. Was there any consideration of keeping that even at zero?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, if you recall from the previous meeting, we presented 3 different options to Council, which showed the different tax scenarios that we proposed. And we also had a set of objectives. And one of our objectives was to try to balance a decrease to the commercial sector, which has high ratios, as well as to the industrial sector, which has high ratios. And the other was to keep the residential no higher, the increase no higher than what the actual levy increase was, which was at 3.54. So that is why you see that 3.54. It was to balance out all of those objectives.
Okay. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, this is the bylaw that's just enacting what we've already approved at our last meeting.
No, it's fine. I'm just asking a question here.
If we can have the motion, Mr. Clerk.
Motioned by Councillor Shoemaker, I'll use you again as the mover, and Councillor Dufour, resolve that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda under date 2019-04-01 be approved, save and except 2019-63 and 2019-75.
All in favor? Carried.
Motion by Councillors Scott and Dufour, resolve that this council proceed into closed session to discuss 2 items concerning trade secrets or commercial information, 1 item concerning solicitor-client privilege, and 1 item concerning labor relations and negotiations. Further be it resolved that should said closed session be adjourned, the council may reconvene in closed session to continue to discuss the same matter without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
All in favor? Carried.
A motion by Councillors Scott and Bezo Allen resolved that this council shall now adjourn.
All in favor?